Hello, cats and kittens. It's good to be back. How are you this Sunday evening for this impromptu live stream? I am your host, Brianna Joy Gray. You probably already know that. If you are a regular Bad Faith listener, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening. While you're here, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. We release a lot of our content that is a premium content in partially here. So clips of it are here. And this week's episodes are going to be inverted, the premium and the public episode. So tomorrow would normally be a premium episode, but because it's a two-parter this week, we decided to go ahead and release the first part as public on Monday. And the video episode of that interview will be dropping in the morning. It is an extended interview with the deputy campaign manager of Bernie 2020, Ari Rabenhoft, who answers a lot of questions I think a lot of folks have been having about what exactly happened to the Bernie campaign, which are particularly germane given the disappointing loss of Senator Nina Turner this past week and her race for the Ohio 11th district. So please tune in for that. We've got some fabulous folks in the wings, so let me bring them in without any further delay. Hello, gentlemen.
Good evening. Good evening to you, Brianna.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing very well. How are the both of you?
Doing well. Peace and greetings, Brother Leslie. How are you?
I'm good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
So Bad Faith listeners know you both, obviously, but Pascal of This Is Revolution podcast, do you want to introduce yourself and let people know where they can find you and what you're all about?
Sure. My name is Pascal Robert. I'm co-host This Is Revolution podcast, which you can find. We live stream on YouTube and all your relevant social media on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. and Saturdays at noon. I'm also a contributor for Black Agenda Report. Some of you may know my writing from there. I've been writing for there for over about 10 years. Have publications throughout the internet, Huffington Post, Alternet, allhiphop.com. I've been writing left politics for a while.
Well, it shows because the reaction that we got to your presence on our recent episode that was ostensibly about Haiti, but went much more broadly into a number of other subjects. The feedback was out of control. You are so compelling and so thoughtful, and I'm looking forward to getting your thoughts on some of our recent episodes and what's going on in the world right now. Leslie, we know you need an introduction, but go ahead and do it.
Yes, I'm the host of Struggle Session, patreon.com/struggle session. And make sure to check out the shirt shop. I don't have my shirt on, but if you like cool shirts like this, check it out, struggle session .shop. We host a podcast about the intersection of politics and pop culture. And Bree, I'm so happy to talk to you tonight because I just got done watching the end of Star Trek Into Darkness. And I've never heard your thoughts on that movie where they magically heal Kirk with Khan's blood at the end. Spoiler alert for anybody who didn't get that. I just as a longtime Trekkie, how did you feel about like the space magic counterterrorism Trek?
Okay,
Into
so
Darkness.
this was the second new one or the first new one, the Chris Pine one.
The second Chris Pine.
So it's been a while since I don't like rewatch the new ones regularly. I remember loving the first one, like sitting with my family on the edge of my seat. The second one, I seem to remember liking the throwback to the death of Spock. And I mean, you've watched the originals, right?
Yes. They're great movies. They're really great.
So I remember appreciating like you can call it heavy-handed, but the very obvious fan nod to the death of Spock and his rehabilitation in Star Trek 3, I guess. So I remember liking it, but was there something specific? You just couldn't suspend your disbelief for the space movie, Leslie?
Yeah, I couldn't because at the end of the day, so first of all, they can teleport anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously. And that's one way they break Star Trek. They also, like at the end of the movie, Kirk is dead, like DEAD, dead as a doornail, dead. And they bring him back by just injecting him with the blood from a Khan, which is like, why don't you do that for everybody who dies for the rest of the time?
I will say that they do play faster and looser with those kinds of things in the new movies. Obviously, the fans are concerned. Obviously, the whole conceit of Voyager, for instance, depends on them not being able to teleport anywhere in the galaxy. And people I've seen have some similar complaints about what's going on in Discovery with the space mushrooms and their ability to zoom all over the place because of that. Like, I confess that I watched one season. I don't even think I got to the end of the first season of Discovery, not necessarily because I don't like it. I'm willing to give it a shot, but I don't know, man. It was a combination of things. I was like waiting for other people, and then I didn't see those other people, and it just kind of fell off my radar, and I started watching Billions, and it was a whole thing. But I will recommit to it, and I will get back to you, Leslie, with a more informed answer.
Okay. All right,
and perhaps a debate.
Actually, based on this subject, I want to make a shameless plug and invitation. One of the things that my co-host Jason Miles hosts, I usually kind of don't participate, though sometimes I do, is a nerd night we have on This Is Revolution, which covers Star Wars, Star Trek, pop culture, superheroes, comic books. I'm the politics guy. He's the pop culture guy. Unless it's black pop culture, I'll talk about that. And I was wondering, we might have to have like a black nerd night. We do it once a month with you guys to come on and talk about Star Trek, Star Wars, and black sci-fi and all of your inclinations on nerd night. We might have to have like a black nerd night if you guys are willing to come on This Is Revolution to do that one.
Oh, that sounds like an absolutely wonderful invitation. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I'm 100%.
I might not be there, but
yeah, thank you.
We're more than willing to host, and you guys will be entertained because he is into that. So I like Star Trek. I like Star Wars. I won't say which one I like better because I know.
No. Pascal, you've got to commit to which one you like better, so we know what kind of the cut of your jib.
Listen, I'm here in good. This is the good vibe episode.
Good vibes only.
This is good vibe. No contention. No, I like them both. I'm old enough to remember how much I like the original Star Trek. I was a kid and watched Star Wars. I'm a little older than both of you. I watched Star Wars in the movies, the first one. I like them all. So I'm just going to. I appreciate science fiction. It's okay. I mean, I find the storylines interesting. Empire versus imperialism. It's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah.
So my mother apparently was pregnant with my brother and went into labor after having watched one of the Star Wars in theater, and attributes that to his general affect and love of sci-fi, shall we say. So you're right that not old enough to have seen it in theaters, but I feel like an inheritance of love of sci-fi. What do you think that's about, by the way? Do you think that Black people in particular find some refuge in sci-fi that's unique to us?
I don't think it's a particularly. I know sci-fi is one of those types of genres. I think has a cross-racial, cross-ethnic, international kind of appeal if it's done well. I mean, we do have, don't forget there is Afrofuturism, the books of the famous writer. Oh my God, I can't believe I forget her name.
Octavia Butler.
Octavia Butler. There are many Black readers who love her work, but I think that science. I think it's generational. I don't think if you talk to Black folk who are baby boomers and older, that they have the same affection for science fiction that probably young baby boomers. When I mean young baby boomers, people who born like late 50s, early 60s to the contemporary generation. But I think science fiction really kind of explodes in terms of its quality, really kind of in what we call the 50-year counter-revolution. And so which is after the death of Martin Luther King, starting with Star Trek and basically from the late 60s into today. So it's an interesting point how science fiction is actually something that develops in this period of time where American politics is actually a counter-revolution against everything from the new left of the 60s. That's an interesting kind of correlation. I think we should really think about that. Why is that the case that science fiction kind of becomes? I mean, there was a TV show Lost in Space. You guys we're all too young to have seen it when it was on TV.
There's a new one though.
There's a new one, but I used to watch the reruns when I was a kid back in the day when we used to have good reruns. So, so that I wonder if Lost in Space was the first science fiction TV show in American history. That's a good little piece of trivia. Do you know the answer to that, Leslie?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I don't know the first one. It was certainly one of the earliest ones. Let me see.
Yeah, but I think it's not really just I think it's a cross-racial kind of appeal that is almost international. Because I know people all over the world who love science fiction.
Well, the reason I ask is because I reflect on the fact that, both my parents loved sci-fi, and my mom was always kind of a bookish nerd, but my father was kind of a cool kid. But he really liked, the Twilight Zone, and even dabbled in some original series Star Trek. And my mother did as well. And my grandfather, who was very much not the kind of person who liked sci-fi, loved the original series because, in his words, it was like the only show where there was a black woman on TV that ain't no maid, that kind of narrative that gets talked about with Uhura and whatnot. And we all know all the firsts that are kind of apocryphally attributed to this show, the first interracial kiss, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. But it does feel like sci-fi offers a future, like looking to the future offers a kind of escape for folks and opportunities for folks who ordinarily were sidelined in any contemporary narrative to thrive. And for that reason, people who might not have been a part of nerd culture more broadly were attracted to the genre. I don't know. It's just a thought, but thinking
I'm not going to say that you're wrong, but I definitely, because you just added another element, definitely with the introduction of the Uhuru character in Star Trek, which was definitely a kind of civil rights, kind of Cold War, realpolitik of including black faces into film in a more noble light. This is why we have Sidney Poitier, who has the change from Stephen Feshett to Sidney Poitier is about Cold War politics. It's about basically changing the image of black people to diminish the antagonism the global South has in the face of rising communism during the civil rights movement to show that America is progressive. So Star Trek is part of that effort in the 60s. So I can understand why black folk in the U.S., towards the end of Jim Crow would have been kind of somewhat fascinated with that TV show. But I mean, I can't say that Star Trek or that science fiction is that racialized that I know black folk who don't like science fiction.
I mean, yes. I mean, it's still marginal in some respects. Although, I mean, there's a whole, go ahead, Leslie.
I think that's not going to be true very soon, because all of these kids is nothing but anime, Naruto, and the MCU. So it's like that's what all the kids are into. So since sci-fi is so mainstream now, every kid is a little dweeb right now.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's all this discourse now about how it's not even niche anymore, and some folks feel some kind of way about it. Like they liked being unique, they liked being marginal in some respects, they liked being counterculture, and it's increasingly difficult when dressing up in cosplay or whatever is the cool thing to do. I mean,
let's throw a wrench in that. How do you feel that the movie Black Panther fits into that kind of discourse, the whole discourse of race, science fiction, and its social impact amongst black folk?
What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts about Black Panther when it came out, but ultimately now it ended up being, I feel, just another Marvel movie, more or less. I don't think it was very significant or important. Like, what's the follow-up to Black Panther? It's a streaming web series on Disney Plus. I don't think that's I don't know if that's a cultural revolution. It's just I didn't see a copycat Black Panther out the next year from a different company. Big movies usually get that. When Batman came out, they tried to put out all these other superhero movies, and when Tim Burton's Batman came out, but you already have the next 30 superhero movies laid out. There's not going to be any changes. They're not bumping Blade up. So I don't know what's really changing. Like, Black Panther was put in this slot by Disney, and then there's the next movie and the next movie and the next movie, and there's no it's not like Black Panther came out and there's okay, now we're gonna fast line this other black hero, this other black superhero in any real way.
Well, but what about this question? And correct me if this isn't what you were asking, Pascal, but how does Black Panther the movie change our understanding of nerd culture as actually marginal versus mainstream? Do you think it was part of a push toward it becoming mainstream? Is it fully mainstream now? Was Black Panther as a franchise ever at risk of feeling nerdy or marginalized?
I don't think Black Panther was going to be nerdy or marginalized. I think it was definitely racialized in that it resonated with Black audiences in a way that it didn't particularly resonate with largely white audiences. I think for obvious reasons that it's a film that's kind of rooted in a piece. I wrote a piece about this, what I call the politics of redemption. Like the fact that Black people are redeemed because we can show, like, look, we have a great civilization. We have achieved wonderful things. Now you can respect us. And that's a theme that kind of plays throughout Black political history in multiple ways. But that's actually kind of a tacit part of what the whole admiration and affection for Black Panther was. Is like, we can see Black folk own their own empire. Does this make you feel good? And, so I think that was part of I actually think that kind of politics and worldview is rather not a positive thing to have, because it always means that you're asking or you're seeking the approval of the people that you believe are oppressing you. So it's like it becomes a vicious cycle over and over again. But it is a part of Black intellectual and literary history as well. It's not something, even in Haiti, as a matter of fact, if you read the writings of the founders of the Haitian Republic and the Haitian Empire, the whole need to, they literally would say that we look at Haiti as a vindication of the Black race in the world. So the question becomes, who are you vindicating the Black race to exactly?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go ahead, Leslie. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's really interesting. You mentioned that because Ta-Nehisi Coates, when he was writing his Black Panther run, he made this kind of, what you're saying, explicit. He established, so Wakanda wasn't created by Black people. It was created by, I think, Jack Kirby and Stanley, white guys, basically a fictional African country. And to put it in the harsh terms, and I think it deserves, is basically, what if Africa wasn't bad? That's basically what Wakanda is supposed to represent. And it has matured over time and gotten a little bit, better. And a lot of great writers like Christopher Priest have done a lot with it to explore like the difference between like why Black Panther being Wakandan, that doesn't make him a Black American. They've explored that sort of thing. But Ta-Nehisi Coates, when he was writing about Wakanda, he made this revision to its history where instead of Wakanda being this great Black civilization who had this great ore that allowed them to make these sci-fi weapons or whatever and defeat colonialism, they actually themselves were colonizers. They had displaced this indigenous people in Wakanda. These black Africans came and displaced these like alien creatures in Wakanda and killed them off. And there's a line in Coates where he kind of sums up his theory, and I think it's something like, did you ever think that a great nation could be built on something other than another nation?
Maybe he's projecting his affection for Obama on what he sees in Wakanda in terms of destroying black nations and Black people.
Well, I'm wary of getting back into our epic is Black Panther good discourse.
You guys did that show already?
Oh yes, on Struggle Session, patreon.com/struggle. It was huge. Oh, okay. It was a big deal. But as you see, me and Bree still friends. We were very much on the opposite side.
Bree, were you going to the theater with your kente cloth jump?
Oh boy, no, guys. I was as I'm liable to do, making a narrow argument about the fact that I think the Killmonger character was being misread as too explicitly positive, just because he was painted in opposition to Black Panther, who had some pretty obvious flaws that were, I think, very self-consciously added to the movie as a way to demonstrate his personal growth over the course of the film. And people, I felt like, selectively read out the fact that Killmonger, while superficially was going on this kind of like revolutionary tirade where he was going to be kind of a liberatory figure, had been trained by the CIA and objective to get weapons like free Black peoples across the world. It was, if I recall correctly, to randomly cause chaos by spreading weapons of mass destruction across the globe, not to liberate Black people, but just to basically further the efforts of the CIA that trained him, and sow discord in a way that was going to basically concretize Western hegemony. And that I felt like,
at the same time, Wakanda under the king has diplomatic relationships with the CIA and kind of works, I wouldn't say at their behest, but in cahoots with them. That my biggest beef with the whole movie is that we have this great, wonderful African empire that's so great that it still needs to cater to the CIA. I was like, what the heck? What is this about?
Yeah, I'm completely comfortable with the they're all bad narrative, like but they're all deeply imperfect. This is not like a defense of what's his face of Black Panther. That's his name. That's his face. But I do feel like the end of the movie left it kind of unresolved what Black Panther was going to take from his from his realization about how flawed his own father was and the imperial nature of the Wakandan regime. And there's some nods to he's going to build a community center for these like Black kids to play basketball and Killmonger's own neighborhood. It's not clear where it's going to go from there. And I think if you want to say this is some neoliberal platitude they're giving us at the end of the movie, that's fine if we don't get more in the next movie about how he's actually going to try to move Wakanda away from a dictatorship, like a, whatever this
monarchy,
whatever they've got going on there. Like, I think those are legitimate questions, but I think that people were taking too hard a line based on what we knew from the movie and also kind of whitewashing Killmonger as problematic-ish.
I know many Black American folk who loved Killmonger, but they loved him very much. I was not surprised about that, particularly in the particular moment that we were having when the movie came out with these online diaspora wars that are insanely popular today. Tragic as well, but very popular.
Well, we can get into that. We are being joined. I wasn't sure that he was going to be able to make it. I'm super excited to say he's part of the chat, and this is a good place probably for us to pivot to the viral article that went around a couple of weeks ago by Bertrand Cooper in Current Affairs magazine about the question of who should be creating Black art and the fact that poor Black creators are largely boxed out from the creation of Black cultural products, despite the fact that Black culture products very often are focused on the experiences of the Black poor. So welcome, Bertrand. I'm so glad you're able to join us.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Bertrand, I really enjoyed your piece, man. I felt the vibes, brother. I felt the vibes.
I appreciate that. That means a lot, man. Yeah, I'm surprised every time you say viral, Bree. I'm stunned.
Wait, was I the
I
one?
know you like that. That's why I said it again.
Was I'm the one who introduced that piece to you, or had you read it before I shared it with you?
Well, I mean, I see the stuff germinating. I will confess that I'm not super involved in the day-to-day of current affairs. It's largely just symbolic that I'm a contributing editor, but I am still on the Slack and I do see things as they're coming out and will read pieces that are germane to my interest. So I was aware of it. Kind of earlier in the pipeline, Pascal, but I do appreciate always people sharing things with me in the DMs because it's so easy to miss stuff. Pascal, what was it about Bertrand's piece that piqued your interest?
Well, if you've read my work at Black Agenda Report and you're familiar with the discourse that we have at This Is Revolution, I am a fan of anyone who highlights the internal class stratification and class contradictions that exist in Black society, whether it's in America, whether it's Haiti, whether it's in Africa, whether it's anywhere, because I understand how reticent Black people are to admit how much internal class stratification renders the effort to overall Black liberation, TMLLC, redundant, because we have those who work as, in the international context, you would call them the comprador bourgeoisie, or you would call them collaborators, perhaps in the American context. And that has always been a phenomenon since before slavery, on the African continent, because Black people are just like normal people. The idea that melanin gives you some kind of super collective racial unity is a farce. It always has been. And believing that is also used oftentimes as subterfuge to help facilitate the oppression of Black people. I wrote a piece about that too, called The Fallacy of Racial Kinship Politics. Check it out, Black Agenda Report.
People absolutely should. So, Bertrand, for those who are listening right now and haven't listened to our episode with you and Damon Young from Very Smart Brothers, lay out kind of broadly what this piece is about and what I think was unique about it in the discourse. I know I spoke to someone who said, like, this is one of those articles that you read and you're like, I can't believe this hasn't been written yet, because it speaks to an obvious truth, but one that I think most folks in this space don't typically tackle, because to your point, in the article's point, most people who are in this space, as it were, don't come from a kind of lower income class background.
Yeah. So I think the fastest way to lay it out is, and this, we're at a good time just for this piece and to lay it out. But when somebody like George Floyd is brutally murdered, this is a person who has a certain collection of features. Not only is he Black, but he's from the projects. He represents a class of Black people. And at this point in time, most Black Americans who are raised in poverty, they're third generation poor. That it's very difficult to move out of Black poverty. So from my vantage point, you're dealing with a group of people that's verging on being a caste. It's so rare to escape poverty when you're born into it and you're Black. When somebody like that is, murdered, and we get to see this all the time, the response to that, very often the first response happens in popular culture. That's the arena we expect to see a response most quickly. And that response normally comes in the form of increasing the visibility of Black creators. Most people will recall that, your favorite magazine, journal, they most likely did a Black issue that put Black authors front and center. If you have Netflix, Hulu, any of the streaming channels, there was Black watch lists, all these suggestions of what you should be doing. There's a whole slew of Black movies that received a bunch more attention than they would have otherwise. And all of this is being done in response to, first, the murder of Black people who have this collection of economic traits in common. Mostly, they were born into poverty. It's happening because of that. And the other part is there's a transaction here. People imagine that doing this is in some way remunerating the Black community for what happened to individuals like George Floyd. But the missing element here is class. What I really tried to bring to the fore is that popular culture, even though it houses our creative enterprises, it's not this airy, ephemeral thing that's outside of the normal economic structure. It is an industry made up of occupations that people apply for. To apply for those occupations, you have to have a bachelor's degree. The moment you use college as a filter for your applicants, you're bringing in the class structure that college has. Poor kids do not graduate with a bachelor's degree very often. The common statistic, and this is a generous one, is 1 out of every 10 low-income high schoolers will graduate with a 4-year degree one day. The better way to think of that is 9 out of 10 people holding a bachelor's degree are from one of the non-poor classes. For Black people, it's more severe. So you have all of these pop culture jobs being given to Black people, but they have to have a bachelor's degree to apply. So we have this system where George Floyd's class, the Black poor, create the situation that produces these jobs. But if George Floyd were to be resurrected somehow, he wouldn't be able to apply for the jobs being given out in his honor. And coming from that background, coming from poverty, me saying these things is a little bit different, because a lot of times it's Black middle and upper class folks talking amongst themselves and interpreting these events and interpreting the statistics, whereas I switch back and forth between talking about the statistics and also just my memories of living them. And that really changes it for people. And I think the Twitter response has shown that, because a ton of the people who've gotten involved in conversation are people who say that they share this background and that this has bothered them for a while.
Well, this is let me tell you something, Bertrand. You did a major service to those who were able to consume that article. You did something that has only begun to be done in the post-Obama era, that has needed to be done probably since the earliest point of this republic, which was puncture the charade that racial kinship creates a unitary interest, worldview, or political interest amongst Black people. And what it also illustrates is that Black educated, we want to call them elites, middle class, or particularly university pedigree Black people have historically, going back to the 19th century, used the suffering of those who are of the Black lower socioeconomic strata to extract patronage and policy from the ruling class that usually benefits them disproportionately and neglects the actual condition of the Black poor and working class. And the perfect example of that is what happened after the Civil Rights Movement. And a good book that explains that, if you all don't have it, I have a copy of the book here, is Preston Smith's Racial Democracy in the Black Metropolis, Housing Policy in Post-War Chicago. The whole book is basically talking about how Black middle-class folk helped facilitate and worsen housing segregation in Chicago during the civil rights, post-World War II and civil rights era, out of protecting their class interest, and how, and this is well phrased by Preston Smith, racial democracy, as opposed to social democracy, leads to a situation in which the policy concessions that the Black elites, who are always going to be the negotiators for the interests of the Black majority, get the lion's share of those concessions, while usually the Black poor and working class don't even get the crumbs from the fatback and biscuits. So what it is that, so at one time in Black politics, there was a plea for social democracy. With the rise of the Black socialists and communists and the white socialists and communists in the early 20th century, going to the 30s and 40s, the argument that you would see is that we need to have a race and class-based politics that challenges the fact that Black people are disproportionately poor, disproportionately left out of unions, disproportionately unable to get good jobs, because there is a material connection to the way in which capitalism relegates Black people to the reserve army of labor. And unless we change and challenge that, this race-based policy will change that. That was an understanding that large segments of the Black community in the United States, many of them were communists and socialists, understood. The McCarthy era, starting in the 50s, neutralized that politics and made it impossible. And then the civil rights movement moved largely to racial democracy, which is basically race-first politics. We need race-based policy, race-first politics. Well, if the people who are negotiating for that politics, and what's even better about Preston's books, he says that even the Black nationalists who were opposed to integration, they wanted racial democracy, and the integrationists wanted racial democracy, and it didn't matter, because either way, the elites of both of those political ideologies always got the lion's share of the benefits from those politics, and the Black poor and working class got left behind. So his argument is that in today's age, when social democracy is now popular again, we're seeing the Black chattering class, the Black elites, the Black political class, because they are in a crisis of capitalism and also going through their own neuroses, because the racial politics they used to get them into the 50-year counter-revolution isn't working anymore, because even white people are being ground to powder. They're sticking to what they have, and they are afraid of letting Black people buy into social democracy or socialism, because they realize that once you have Black working class people and white working class people and Latino working class people working together on a political agenda, guess who becomes irrelevant to the ruling class? The Black ventriloquist.
Yeah. So for those who haven't listened to our recent episode with Pascal, called Fatback and Biscuits, you should definitely go back and listen to that. He spits all the fire. But let me ask you guys this, because I will confess, while I think that everything that you said just now was 100% true, and obviously loved Bertrand's article, there's a part of me that still feels like there's an opportunity to exploit the kind of really superficial version of identity politics that most Black people have bought into, the kind of I'm rooting for everyone Black mug politics, to say, let's use this to force people of a more upper middle class background to commit to some of these economic issues that the neoliberal politicians, who are often Black for identity politics reasons, try to push, right? So to say, okay, we're rooting for everybody Black, there's potential in a person like a Senator Nina Turner running for office, as opposed to someone like Bernie Sanders being the one who is wearing the mantle of socialism, the mascot for democratic socialism, right? There's potential for the squad members and all their diversity to have a different kind of effect, or at least be immunized for the kind of weaponization of identity that happens to white progressives, and to use some sense of racial identity, whether or not it's genuine, solidarity among classes. There does seem to me to be more solidarity among Black people of different classes than there are among white people that leads to some semblance of political opportunity. Am I wrong in thinking so?
I would argue, I'm going to use a metaphor. The Black tenant who's getting ripped to shreds by his Black middle-class landlord is going to say, listen, we have a Black landlord. We can't destroy his business. The white tenant who's getting himself ripped to shreds by his white landlord is going to tenant court to sue him for all of his exigencies. So how does that racial kinship actually work in the reality when we have a whole history of Black elected officials, particularly in the 80s and the 70s, when you had the rise of the Black urban regimes during a time in which the actual coffers of these cities were contracting, and out of that same kind of racial kinship, we all in this together, you would find Black mayors and the Black political class leverage that to ground working class and poor Black people to powder with policies that basically put them in just as bad, if not a worse position than they would have been under white political regimes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that for me, to use a very short time window out of my life, just pretty much since Trayvon was killed, there's been opportunities. I mean, my focus is the pop cultural landscape. There's been plenty of interest in Black art, Black creativity, these jobs, in popular culture. The clock's been running. I'm not familiar with how that has manifested better opportunities for the class of Black people that George Floyd comes from. But every single year for the last decade, I've watched the percentage of Black students at Harvard and Yale and all the Ivy League increase. I'm watching the visibility of Black creators from Ivy League and other, highly educated males. They're getting more and more opportunities. And I'm not seeing them use that or this naive version of Black unity politics to really produce anything for the class of people that I'm concerned with. And one of the responses to me when I ask people, okay, so I'm getting told that there's all sorts of impoverished Black creators who are out there on TikTok and all these other, arenas, they're all over the place. When I ask people, if you want to involve the Black poor, it's pretty simple. You do that in hiring. You can train them. You can bring them in when you're doing a screenplay or something about that experience. You can try and get those people in there. We know where they're at. The mere suggestion that something concrete be done to bring them into the leadership, I get told, why would we need to do that? And can I just assume that the Black middle class is doing well enough to represent those interests? I don't understand why there would be any pushback for doing something that would allow me to point to somebody and say, oh, here's how they got somebody living in the CUNY Homes projects into the writer's room. I don't know why that receives any pushback at all.
Bertrand, I actually want to push back, even though as much as I love you, I want to push back against you right here. Yeah. Because I don't think that we should romanticize the notion of having the Black poor as the content creators and thinking the content was going to be any better or edifying to Black people, i.e. hip hop, i.e. gangster movies that hip hop producers created, i.e. a whole plethora in the last 50 years of Black cultural production that was literally created by largely Black men and women who literally came from the Black poor, who pejoratively called the Black underclass, who, because of the exigencies of capitalism, I make the argument that in a capitalist society, popular culture is always going to be used for usurpation by the ruling class. Popular culture is a means of propaganda. Period. All media is a means of propaganda. You look at you start going back to Edward Bernays, the origins of media, the origins of advertising. Even if I wrote a piece in Black Agenda Report about Clarence Avant, even the rise of Black cultural production after the Civil Rights Movement, if you read the Kerner Commission report, was done to neutralize the actual urban rebellions of the 60s and early 70s and get Black people more interested in seeing themselves on Soul Train and Good Times. These things don't happen accidentally in a vacuum. So for me, all media is a form of propaganda. So again, I'm not one of these folks that believes that just having poor Black folk get the fat checks to do cultural production is going to make it more edifying and revolutionary, because we've had pop culture genres where poor Black folk were doing the creative work, and it ends up being just as eviscerating of Black sensibilities, culture, ideas, or values. Sometimes it can be revolutionary. Sure, you might get a Public Enemy. Sure, you might get Immortal Technique. But that, I would argue, particularly in the hip hop, as someone who was born in New York City during the time when hip hop got born, I would argue that's actually the minority of the cultural production that comes out of that genre, because those brothers and sisters are coming from poor, desperate circumstances. Capitalism sometimes is more able to even exploit them and create a certain kind of culture of degeneracy within that popular culture that is not particularly edifying or revolutionary against capitalism, classism, socialism. How many rappers do we see right now promoting Black capitalism in the Black community as if this has never been tried before? It's been tried since the rise of Nixon, and it always works for Black middle class and elites and grounds Black poor and working class people to dust. The Color of Wealth talks about that, rather extensively.
I would like to just, in hip hop, in rap, we can find rappers who do come from poverty. I would point out, though, that very often we're talking specifically about the artist alone within a team of other college-educated folks in a company full of college-educated folks. So it's very often not this whole group of poor Black people who are getting to produce the art. And then once we switch over to other forms of popular culture, once we switch over to journalism, novels, screenwriting, movie writing, the number of folks that we're getting, it's going to dwindle quite a bit. And it's already not that great in hip hop when you consider the entire record building. So I just want to call out that a lot of times I don't have what I think is a critical mass of poor Black people. I think very often we have to go to hip hop or certain, we have to go to sports, and we can find the individual by themselves surrounded by other people who come from a different class background than them. The other thing I would say is, like, I agree with you in the way that capitalism often, the final result of these people trying to produce within a capitalistic system, but I remain beholden to wanting self-determination for poor Black people. They might be unsuccessful at using the tools provided to them with that self-determination to generate revolution. But the fact that they might not succeed at it doesn't make me any less eager to make sure they're the ones determining how to use the tool. I would love for there to be such a critical mass of poor Black people who are all getting to create art, not just in hip hop and not just being the one rapping, but the person actually producing the track, the person. And I really don't know what would happen if there was a critical mass of them. Maybe they would just end up being, just continuing the propaganda the way that you've described. But for me, my focus right now is like the public sentiment, the empathy that is intended for them is going to them and then being used to give them the opportunity to do something with it. I'd love for them to do something revolutionary with that political will. But really, for me, my focus right now is that they get to dictate what political will allotted for them, what it is leveraged to do.
I'm a firm believer, as Breonna can tell you, in working class and poor Black politics. I think it should be a coalition politics, because I think that'll be more effective in getting what you want. But I also believe in maintaining the integrity of the interests of Black, poor, and working class people, so that they do not get sacrificed in those racial coalitions. But I don't disagree with you. I believe in empowering working class and poor Black people, but I think that it has to come through political education and radicalization first, and then the creation of the art second. I think just creating the art out of being poor within the capitalist ideological infrastructure guarantees you nothing revolutionary radical, but simply a kind of reifying the overall capitalist hierarchy, which is, I think, what we see in a lot of current Black popular music, particularly a lot of rap music. I think that providing that political education to those people, and then using art in a revolutionary capacity, as Amilcar Cabral suggested, then we're talking about something. But I think that as long as there's no political education to radicalize those communities and radicalize their politics, their fodder is the cultural fodder they produce is going to be based in replicating the reactionary capitalist hierarchies that's basically oppressing them. And I think that's exactly what we've seen in hip hop. I think hip hop is a direct product of the 50-year counter-revolution. That if hip hop existed in 1969, it would not be the kind of content we have right now.
Well, the question is, like, I think that what we're kind of wary of is doing a kind of identity politics for class, right? Where there's an assumption that because someone comes from a particular class background, they are going to be able to resist the forces that would make them be co-opted to, you know, speak to a kind of revolutionary politics that we would like them to do, and that would, we, in our opinion, as leftists, do more to serve the interests of the communities that they come from. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, we've had Ice Cube on this podcast, and there is much that I respect about his willingness to continue to push the Democratic establishment when it was a very difficult thing to do in the lead up to the election. At the same time, there are aspects of what he believes to be the solution out of, you know, this racial caste system that we live in that I don't agree with. He does subscribe to a more kind of a Black capitalist framework. Even someone like Killer Mike, who was a Bernie surrogate, tends toward those kinds of solutions, you know, very broadly speaking. So it's making me reflect in real time here about what we actually expect. And this came up a little bit on the podcast. Even if I agree entirely with Bertrand, is the issue that we live in a racially stratified system where people from lower income groups across the racial spectrum, frankly, don't have access to the same kind of opportunities, aren't able to tell their own stories. And the solution should be addressing it at its root, you know, rather than trying to kind of backdoor all of these inequality issues through, you know, kind of just peer pressuring folks into saying, okay, if you're going to tell a story about the Black poor, you have to have X number of Black poor on staff, or hire this many actors, or find this many writers that actually come from this class group.
If we don't change the ideological superstructure of American society, which means that the way in which, related to the way capital is made, the way how which wealth is generated, the way we view ourselves in education, in school, in housing, in our churches, the way we view the system in terms of how it actually materially works through our cultural lens and social lens, then we're just going to replicate the system. For me, and this is my humble opinion from, you know, my writing and reading Black politics for several years, is that I have no problem with giving the keys to cultural production to the majority of Black people who are poor and working class. What I'm saying is that you've got to change the ideological superstructure of those communities by radicalizing their politics and worldview before you do that, or else all you're going to do is replicate the same hierarchies that have put them in that position, because that is the base and superstructure that we exist in this society.
So Pascal, is art not a part of doing that? And therefore, are we kind of like in a loop? And it is Bertrand right to say, if we're going to have any chance of radicalizing Black folks in that way, we need to have some folks getting their foot on the door to create the cultural products that are maybe the, I don't know, sorry to bother yous, that have a chance of getting through?
I just want to jump in there real quick, because I want to highlight that I wrote about popular culture not because I felt that it was the appropriate arena to responding to Black issues, or because I thought it was the most important. I'm not even sure if it should be the top 3 arenas, but it was the dominant arena. And it was the arena that I saw pacifying people the most to think progress had been done. And that's why I wrote about it. It was the thing that people were pointing to as evidence of progress. It was the one that was attracting the most attention, because I knew that that was not true. That is why I chose to dive in on it. Whether or not it should be the point of radicalizing folks for a better leftist politic, I really don't know. My main focus was just kind of trying to take make people confront reality with regard to how much hope they were putting into it, that it was this great sign of progress. I mean, I would reference, you know, Ibram X. Kendi's basically love letter to Black popular culture as it is at this moment back in February. That's what I was pushing against.
Well, I think that Bertrand, what you're saying right now demonstrates that the Kerner Commission worked very well in that flooding Black America at the height of one of its most radical revolutionary periods in the late 60s, early 70s, where working class Black people were literally willing to burn this country down. Whether we want to advocate for doing that or not is another conversation, but they were definitely radicalized enough to do that and take revolution seriously. That what was the response of the ruling class? flood these folks with Soul Train, soul music, good times, and great pop culture. And it had a neutralizing effect. And I would argue that the question that you just raised in terms of how everyone is in this laudatory state regarding Black popular culture is that demobilization worked, and that there's not a realization that that was not an accident, and that the contemporary applause and fetishization of Black popular culture, which I actually don't like at all. Someone's older than all of y'all here, because I understand how much it is a tool of demobilization, and it's part of the reason why Black politics is so stale. And it's part of the reason why we can have neoliberal troglodytes who are in blackface suggest us that we vote for all of these turncoats who have done nothing for the Black community, whether they be Obama, or Kamala Harris or anyone else. And it is part of the reason why Black politics, for the first time, perhaps in the history of Black America, is in the right flank of the party of the Black community, when white progressives and radicals are to the left. That has never happened before, that Black people are in a political position where there are white radicals and leftists to their left, and Black people are in the most conservative faction. Even in the 80s, you had Jesse Jackson. There's always been large constituencies of Black people who were exercising those radical politics in this country. We don't have that anymore. Now we have a kind of maybe mostly white, slightly multiracial. We have Black Alliance for Peace. We have Black Power Media, but largely we have democratic socialists, people coming out of Rose Twitter, Jacobin readers, and so on and so forth, who are Sanders supporters dominating this quote unquote new left, while the fulcrum of Black electoral politics is supporting the people who have brought forth the politics and policies that help facilitate grounding Black people to powder in the 50-year counter-revolution, i.e. Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a natural segue to talking about what we think happened in Cleveland and what lessons need to be learned and how to prevent those kind of upsets.
Bree, if you don't mind, I did want to bring up one thing about.
Sure. No, I wasn't actually going to pivot first. I was going to first just play a clip from this week's podcast, but go ahead and talk first, Leslie.
Yeah, Bertrand, I just I've been working on kind of a similar beat on my show, Struggle Session, patreon.com/struggle session. And but the thing is, I never got to the point that you got, because what struck me was that most of the things that were celebrated as Black media and representation were actually made by white people, like straight up, like Damon Lindelof's Watchmen, probably the most celebrated Black show in the past couple of years. Certainly the year it came out, when tons of Emmys, was promoted explicitly as being a sort of reparations for George Floyd, to the Tulsa massacre. It was presented as this gift to Black people, but it was made by a white guy, Damon Lindelof, upper class, I didn't even get to the point of actually talking about the fact that any Black writers in that room are rich or wealthy or come from backgrounds. I don't know all the writers, but I'm sure I know one was a cop, and that's another kind of political difference between different Black people that was just glossed over, because everybody just said this is a show for Black people, this is great, but it was made by a white guy who's been making other shows for years and years and years. How does he get the credit for Blackness? How does him getting a multi-million-dollar contract from HBO help us? Well,
let me point out that one of the writers, I think, who won a Emmy or whatever you win for these things, Cord Jefferson, who has agreed to come on the show, and we'll be talking to him shortly, did win that award for writing the Tulsa episode. So, do we think, maybe there's benefit to having him in the room because we get a Tulsa episode?
Yeah, it should have been Cord Jefferson should have been running that show. That's my argument. But
to Bertrand's point, I mean, I don't know everything about Cord Jefferson's life, but my perception is that he does not come from a poor background. His mother was white, his father's Black. He, grew up middle class in, I believe, Arizona. So this is potentially an instance where we appreciate the value of him being in the room, but there is a question about whether or not we would have gotten a different kind of story. Maybe one that wasn't about, a thriving upper middle class community getting bombed, but one about something that's closer to a poor Black experience if a different kind of Black person had been in the room. It's an open question.
One of the consequences. I'm sorry. One of the consequences of what Bertrand has so eloquently exposed is that, I heard a comment that the debate that was on your show, on which people were saying, well, even Black upper middle class people are proximate to poverty, and I don't understand how we can say that they can't write authentic Black popular culture. I said, yeah, they're proximate to poverty. They're proximate to it because they're the class enemy of the Black poor and working class. Because if you look at the way they actually describe even people in their own family who might be incarcerated, or people who live in the hood, or people who with the saggy pants, it's not out of love and affection at all. As a matter of fact, if you look at the policies that they encourage, it's usually to help fully ground those people to dust and powder. But my larger point is that even if they do feel that they can authentically represent those Black folk, what makes you think they're not going to do it laced up with respectability politics and all other kind of Oprah Winfrey-esque neoliberal garbage or Ava DuVernay other type crap that they're going to put in there.
Speaking of Ava, I want to play a clip. But Pascal, let me defend myself for a second, because I think that might have been me. The point I was making was not about whether or not a middle class Black person such as myself, who has kind of approximate, associations with family members who are more working class or poor, can represent their stories. But the specific question, and I tried to tease this out in the conversation, there's a question of what counts as appropriation. The idea that you are not entitled to tell a certain kind of story because you're too attenuated from it, you're too ignorant of it, you're going to do a bad job telling it. And this question of exploitation, which I think undoubtedly happens when someone who doesn't actually belong to the class tells a story and gets remunerated for it, regardless of how good a job they do. And I was trying to separate those things out because I think this conversation about cultural appropriation broadly outside of the Black context often gets overextended. And gets into this kind of nonsense realm where it's like, I've heard conservatives argue, well, non-white people shouldn't play the violin because we invented it, and they shouldn't speak English because we invented it. And, I don't want to be in that place. So I'd like to have some firmer rules about what we actually are upset about when someone from one group does something or embodies something that isn't from the group that they are in. And I think exploitation is a better lens. And so I completely agree with you about the exploitative nature of it and the fact that the proceeds aren't going to those groups. But on the podcast, folks disagreed. And so I want to share this brief clip of one of the spicier moments, which I completely have the technical ability to do because I'm a professional. And I'm doing it right now. Okay.
Is it possible for a Black creative to exploit or appropriate the experience of the Black poor? Because if that's not even on the table, if it's literally impossible for a Black creative from the middle class to commit appropriation of poor Black people's experience, then I really can't make my point. If that's not possible, but I'm assuming that it is possible, that if I have a Black creative from the middle class who grew up in a suburb and they decide to go and depict the lives of the Black poor, but they're not from it, so they don't have that personal experience of it, and they're not obligated to bring those people in, and then they benefit from that work, that feels appropriative to me.
I believe it's possible. With the examples we brought up with Issa, with Donald Glover, with Ava DuVernay, I just don't see any of them doing that.
Do they need controls, or do we just assume that they're not doing it? Do they have to do anything to substantiate that they're not appropriating those experiences?
Well, I guess who is the judge of that? Who would be the judge of whether or not they're appropriating the experience?
Very few of us don't have poor people in our lives. Very few of us haven't had the experience of a relative who's been incarcerated or, having to bail somebody out financially in their family or things like that. I'm thinking of my wealthiest Black friend, and, the doctor father in that family's came from a very poor environment in Chicago. I'm struggling to think of a person who a Black person who was so attenuated from poverty, even Diddy, you know what I mean? I'm struggling to think of a Black person who's so attenuated from poverty that I would feel like it was inappropriate for them to write a story that referenced poverty. Okay. Come for me.
I totally disagree with that. I think that there are lots of Black people I wouldn't want them writing stories of Black poverty.
That's a different question, Pascal. Yeah. Wouldn't want them to write for sure. I don't, Ava DuVernay has blocked me on the internet because I said I didn't like Joe Biden. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that this cultural appropriation, I'm not a fan of the whole, I think cultural appropriation, the whole discourse is a consequence of having a politics that went away from materialism over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
No one was crying about cultural appropriation in 1975, 1983, or 1984. What people were crying about is how come I can't get more white people to listen to my stuff or subsidize it or help me create it, quite frankly. So I'm not a fan of the whole framing. Do I believe that there can be ways in which people literally steal Black cultural creation and appropriate it and sell it and make money off it without giving credit to Black people? Yes, I think that is a problem. And actually, there are legal mechanisms to fight that. But this notion that, like, Black XYZ person can't, wear a Kango because that's cultural appropriation. Number one, who owns the company Kango in the first place? Absurd, So, I think that whole discourse is a part of this whole postmodern wokeness garbage that we've been seeing too much of in the contemporary moment, and I frankly would want to abandon it totally. I frankly would say that I wouldn't want those Black elites or upper middle class to create Black cultural production that talks about the Black poor, because they often have an antagonism to the Black poor in their own families, quite frankly. Yeah, they have proximity to it, and that proximity usually evidences get away from me. You can't come to my house for Thanksgiving because you are bad look for my business partners when I invite them to the cocktail party at my house.
Yeah. So this is something I've been thinking about since cultural appropriation became a buzzword right around the Miley Cyrus twerking thing, right? And when everybody pretended to care and be mad about that Miley Cyrus was stealing from Black people for twerking. And I'm from Louisiana, and I grew up in the 90s. I remember Cash Money Records, Magnolia Shorty, all that stuff. So I know, obviously twerking goes back hundreds of years, but when we're talking about this specific thing, it started in my area. I know where it came from. I know how certain Black people there would look down on women who twerked. I certainly know how people from other areas would look down on music from the South. Black people from New York would look down on music from the South and twerking, that sort of dancing, years before it became popular and mainstream. And so I see these people writing these articles, and they're all from Brooklyn. I'm like, you learned about twerking at the same time Miley Cyrus did. I don't know how this is helping those poor Black women in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, in Louisiana, who have nothing, who have no money, who have nothing, absolutely nothing. How is it helping them to pretend to be mad about Miley Cyrus for shaking her little ass? I don't understand what that does for those poor Black women that are looked down upon by, frankly, I'm sorry, maybe this is a spicy take, the sort of people who get hired to write those articles complaining about cultural appropriation.
I agree with you. Very, very well said, Leslie. Right on the money.
There's a version of a Black middle class person making a movie or a show about the Black poor and being very upfront about the fact that their relationship to that area is visiting cousins, visiting families, so on and so forth, that they had to travel there. And when we really think about visiting our cousins, we're not talking about spending 4 weekends out of every month there. We're talking about normal visiting, especially if you're the wealthiest member of your family. They can be upfront about all of that. But then if they do that, they're not going to get a particular type of interview at the New York Times. And this is, to bring him back up, this is the one that Donald Glover got, and the one where it said Donald Glover cannot save you or Donald Glover cannot save us. This is a very particular treatment where a white audience is told that this Black content is being made by somebody who can transport you to that space. He accepted that interview. He accepted somebody who wrote and compared his show to Blackish and took a little dig and said how Donald Glover's show substantially has more Black viewers than Blackish, even though Blackish, if you paid attention to how many more viewers it has in general and thus has more Black people watching it, Donald Glover accepted that interview, accepted that treatment, accepted being pitched, not as an observer, not as a guy visiting people, but as somebody who was in it. And for me, that's really important. The other part of this is when we speak purely in class terms, and I get it, and I get the need for like a political coalition between poor and working class people, but I work with income and numbers for very specific reasons. Working class right now, on the conservative side, you know, American Enterprise Institute, they put working class as incomes between $30,000 and $69,000 annually. I've seen articles on the left from like Jacobin say, as long as you have the relationship of not being the owner, as long as you're selling your labor, it can be incomes above 70,000. Poverty for a family of four right now is $26,000 a year. And in cities like Philly, Black people are normally at, you know, half the poverty line. So we're talking about the very bottom of the working class earning more than double just a typical poor Black family. And so when we act like if you know how much a dollar is worth, if you know the difference in the neighborhood you can live in when you're living on less than minimum wage versus when you're making $50,000 a year, if you can leave the ghetto on a whim, you do not live in the ghetto. And I cannot recommend enough people listen to Black Boy Fly by Kendrick Lamar. You will understand that part of poverty is the knowledge that you will not get out. It's very self-aware. You will not escape. That is part of it. And anyone trying to do art and speak on the feelings of being poor, don't have that. It's not the same.
So Bertrand, you're not talking about Black bus drivers, postal workers, or CNA workers, or people who might have a union job or government workers. You're talking about not the Black proletariat. You're talking about the Black Lumpenproletariat. In other words, literally the people who are at best living on government subsidies, if at all, or underground urban economies doing various other things, selling, hustling, or things of that nature, where there is no literal connection to organized labor as providing income. It's basically a Black, is that what you would define as a Black and poor? Like Black lumpen underclass, completely divorced from traditional like W-2 type labor?
So for me, the reason why I connect, so the short answer is yes, but the other reason why I focus on that is because when we're doing the research, when we talk about the Black experience, when we're actually talking about the oppressions, when we start saying things like, this is what percentage of prisoners were poor before they go in to prison, that research is using the federal poverty line. When we talk about all these things that you see about unemployment rates, when we talk about student outcomes, every time you see that research, it is closely tethered to the federal poverty line. And so not only do I come from that group, but all these things that have become hallmarks of the Black oppression, they are very specifically put together by researchers who are focusing on that $26,000 or less year family of four. So this is a very, very specific group that's very, very well researched that produces most of these statistics. So yeah, I am talking about that group, but I just want to unpack why, because people who do not work with income very often, they will be, for my taste, a little bit too cavalier with combining the poor and the working class.
What it feels like, Bertrand, I think part of that, is not necessarily in bad faith. I think the left is so invested in identifying a majority group that is big enough to overturn the 1%, that they do want to speak in terms that generalize across anybody who isn't rich, basically. And that does have the effect of erasing the specific experiences of people who are actually poor. Poor and working class becomes this like mantra, and working class gets leaned into more the same way that neoliberals lean into middle class, because most people, there is this feeling that to say poor is stigmatizing, and that people who are poor don't even want to identify as such.
And I agree with all that. And I understand the reason for the coalition. I bring in the money part of it because it's like, if I'm very well educated now, I had that benefit, and I'm not in this group, and poverty is a strange identity where, like, even though it leaves a mark on you and the way you grew up, it's not a class that you can permanently stay in. It's a very strange thing. But back then, if I had shown up to some sort of political gathering with working class people, I would have brought my poverty in there. There would have been power imbalances that if people don't compensate for, are going to likely mean that the working class folks there, even though they may be substantially less powerful economically, less educated, less well connected than their middle class folks, I was substantially beneath that too. And so for me, the unity politics is very dangerous just when there's this assumption that I don't need, people from poverty don't need these extra, or Black people from poverty don't need these extra supports to help them be on level footing with the working class or even the Black middle class, because they do. You come into those rooms with substantially less education and power and worse education. Not that Black working class kids are getting great education. It's just like whatever you think is terrible about their education, you can multiply that for somebody growing up beneath the federal poverty line. And that needs to be accounted for in these alliances.
What's valuable, what you're saying, Bertrand, is that, and what I like is that this kind of collapsed the notions of some of these contemporary movements where you have that are founded by, HBCU graduates and lawyers making $70,000 a year, claiming that all Black people are one underclass together. No, they're not. Because clearly, if you are Black and you're an attorney and you're making $70,000 a year, no matter where you're living, you're not part of the Black underclass. You're not. But there are people who now have hashtag movements who will claim that all Black people are one underclass altogether, and we all poor, and we need reparations because of the racial wealth gap, when the top 10% of Black America owns 75% of Black wealth, and the top 10% of white America owns 75% of white wealth. And the actual greatest division in the racial wealth gap is between those top 10%, because white people have so much more wealth. So basically, are we arguing between living in a trailer park and a housing project in terms of this racial wealth gap? If you really extract it in that way?
Well, Pascal, but wait a minute. What do we do with that if we're trying to build a solidarity movement? I mean, nothing you said is incorrect, but what is the kind of political relevance, or the political the action that gets taken from the reality that there is in some ways more stratification among Black Americans class-wise than there are more broadly in a mixed race group, in a world where we're trying desperately to try to figure out some sense of solidarity? And there does seem to be this feeling of racial solidarity, whether or not it's real or accommodates the lower tranches of the Black American group.
I believe in solidarity.
Yeah,
it has to be. I don't believe in racial solidarity with Black one percenters. I believe that they are the class enemies.
Right, but we're not talking about one percenters. You were just talking about people who make $70,000 a year. That's not a Black one percenter.
In terms of the Black community, you're a Black 1%er making $70,000.
No. You're in a top tier, but you're not a Black 1%er making $70,000 a year.
Remove white people. If you look at just the Black community, you make $75,000 a year. Compared to if you're a Black male making $75,000 a year, you're making more money than the super majority of Black people. That's a fact.
I believe that, but I still don't think that makes you a one percenter within Black people.
It doesn't put you in the same class. Put you in the same class as the majority of Black people.
For sure. For sure. But I think what I'm asking Pascal is like that reality being true. There's some people who will say that and say, well, let's be resentful toward the person making $70,000 a year. Whereas someone who's trying to build a political revolution might say, well, I don't think it's constructive. There's trade-offs here, right? There are obvious reasons that Bertrand has done such a good job outlining why it's important not to invisibilize, to use a word that I know, folks like the experiences, the discrete, particularized experiences of the Black poor. At the same time, is our greater interest being served by creating potentially foregrounding antagonisms between people who ultimately still very much need to be served by a whole slew of social programs and economic realignments in the $70,000 a year area, by pretending as though they are meaningfully privileged in the grand scheme of American economics?
I believe more internal Black class warfare is needed than Black class unity, quite frankly, because the politics of the $75,000 a year making Obama loving, Kamala chucks and pearls wearing Black person who is an attorney is going to be grounding working class and poor, particularly poor Black people, to powder, and historically has been. So I have no desire to make any kind of universal cross. We all in this together. Let's lift every voice and sing politics with those Negroes, because I know those Negroes. I come from that class of Negroes. I know their politics. I know their worldview, and they are the problem, not the solution.
So I'm wondering, why does it feels like it's being presented as a dichotomy, as a dilemma to me, where it's either I can have no acknowledgement of these different class divisions, or the other option would be to fixate them so much that no coalition can be formed. And for me, I mean, whenever, and it's rare, it's becoming increasingly less rare in the post-Obama years. They really do not do many surveys where they separate Black people by class and ask them their thoughts on life anymore. But when they did, the Black poor were very, very aware of the separations. Their communities were very aware of the separations. And so when you're not talking about these things, the people themselves are still talking about them. They know it, and they are watching you smooth it over. And so for me, I'm imagining that being upfront about them would be a better position for doing creating a coalition than not talking about them, having, you know, the wealthy, educated, bougie Black person get off the podium, and then just having my people, assuming they were invited, talk amongst themselves about pretty much how they know that person doesn't come from the neighborhood, and they wonder when they'll see them again, versus actually being upfront about these class divisions and saying what we're going to do to try and, you know, you can't, it's hard because people's jobs are going to be people's jobs, but what are we going to do when we're working together to try and balance out, you know, this economic imbalance? I think being upfront about that is a better position for a coalition. My group's kind of in a weakened place because Black people are 13% of the country. I mean, this is going to go way, way up when they do release the numbers later this year. But, you know, prior to COVID, 18% of them were poor. We're talking about a very tiny percentage of the country. And so it's like we kind of need people to decide that being in real coalition with us is important, because we can't force their hands. And, you know, going back to the pop culture thing, everyone seems pretty comfortable just assuming middle-class Black people have got this, and they've got the poor represented. So
one of the reasons I didn't know until today that Leslie's from Louisiana, which is going to make me like him even more. One of the things I like about Black folk from Louisiana, shout out to Adolph Reed, Torrey Reed, and Senator Johnson, is that Black folk from Louisiana, from my experience, have the best understanding about class among Black people than any Black people in this country, because they have something that we have in Haiti. They have something like Creoles. There's a whole class of Black people who are basically kind of comprador elites that lord over the realities of Black life. And most Black folk who are not Creoles know them to be kind of like class enemies. And I think that one of the reasons why so many of the people we know in Black academics who are very class aware about writing in Black politics, it's not surprising to me that they come from Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, it's very the stratification is very apparent in Louisiana, especially because there's so many Black people in Louisiana that we do have Black politicians, Black mayors, you know, Black elite that you might not expect, and they don't do shit for us, and they don't like us either. So it's like we know that all skin folk ain't kinfolk. That's just like everybody knows that. That's not a surprise to anyone.
Yeah, but here's what's so interesting to me, Leslie. Black people have a saying, not all skin folk are kinfolk. At the same time that their people are buying I'm rooting for everybody Black mugs at quite a clip from Target or wherever one gets such paraphernalia. And there's an obvious conflict there, because I do not believe that, I think that Bertrand is 100% right, that Issa Rae, Stanford grad, does not necessarily represent the interest of the Black poor. Donald Glover might have made a great show in Atlanta that you may or may not want to, you know, pick at in terms of how it represents a certain kind of experience. And we got into a little bit on the podcast whether or not Atlanta really is a Black poor experience or a depiction of a more liminal experience that might actually be pretty germane to Donald Glover's own life. But at the same time, I guess the thing that it keeps like pulling me back is, as someone who's got a political hat on all the time and trying to form coalitions, you know, is there a way, like I think the Issa Raes of the world and the Ava DuVernays of the world want to perceive themselves as acting in the interest of Black folks, in part because, to Bertrand's point, all of these opportunities they're taking advantage of are often being given in the name of like helping Black people and helping the kinds of Black people that aren't them, right? And so they're in a little bit of a vice grip. And is that vice grip not something that we should be exploiting to say, okay, you're rooting for everybody Black? Give more opportunities to support Black folks. Stop supporting neoliberal politicians and exerting pressure in you exploiting that sense of like a Black solidarity, whether or not you think it's genuine, Pascal, to force them or use as one of the tools in our arsenal to force them to have to choose between the white 1% or the Black working and poor class.
Who is the figure from history that says that you can't convince someone to believe something that's not lining his pockets? In other words, you can't force someone to believe something that he's not being paid to believe.
You are Black bourgeois. I am Black bourgeois. I mean, like at the end of the day,
pump the brakes on Black bourgeois. Okay. First of all, I have a particular reason why my politics are the way they are. I have two uncles who studied in the Soviet Union. My family have been Black leftists and Marxists for literally two or three generations. I come from a country where Black people die because of class conflict amongst each other. I've witnessed this in my own family.
Okay, so I well then I'm going to say that I'm bourgeois for sure. Okay. I consider myself to be a class traitor, and I think my politics also come from family. My grandmother was a teenage mother. My mother was 17 when she was born. My grandmother was 17, 16 when my aunt was born. My biological grandfather was in jail for all of my mom's early childhood. And the man I called my grandfather was a revolutionary Black Panther, the kind of guy who said, "Don't ask me where I'm going," when he headed out of his house at night with his rifle with a picture of Malcolm X on the wall. So I believe there are reasons why I have my politics. At the same time, I'm not going to sit here and lie about what class I am in currently. So the reality is maybe it's self-interested and maybe this is a very narrow exception, but I liaise all the time with people who have scraped their way out of or had opportunities that dropped on their lap and enable them to get out of a certain class situation, but still have a politics that is germane to the interest, perhaps not perfectly so, and I'm open to critique, but that have interests in politics that are supportive of a Black poor class they no longer belong to, in part because of those familial relationships. And that's part of why I push back against the idea that those relationships don't matter.
I'm glad you said that. How do those politics manifest? You know how they politics? I'm glad you're going there. And by the way, I'm not trying to make it seem that I'm some kind of poor striver. My mom was a registered nurse. My father was a car mechanic, and he owned a couple of repair shops. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Queens, New York, called Cambria Heights. It's known for being one of the few neighborhoods in Queens where Black people have houses that are worth more than most white people. So I came from a middle-class Black neighborhood. So I'm not trying to fake the funk. I went to elite law. I went to a law school across the river from you. I went to Boston University. So I know I'm in a Black fraternity. I know these Negroes. I've been in one for 30
fraternity.
I've been in one for almost 35 years. So trust me, I know these folk very well.
Which fraternity are you in, Pascal?
We don't have to go. I'm an Alpha Phi Alpha.
You're an Alpha. Did we do this already? My dad was an Alpha.
Your dad was an Alpha. You told me your dad was an Alpha. That's right. You did tell me that.
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The larger point I want to make is that I'm glad you said that these people, this class of people, do believe that they have to do something for the race. This class of people has believed that for over a century, since the 19th century. How do they manifest that believing that we have to do something for the race? I implore you guys to read Touré Reed's book, Not Arms, But Opportunity, about the National Urban League. Because what they believe is in racial uplift, i.e., pull your pants up and take the bonnet off when you go to the store, and let me tell you how to dress more like me so you can get a job, while Black communists were saying we have to fight capitalism so you can get union benefits and find a better way to live for yourself. So yes, they believe in uplift the race, and that's the problem. Because uplift politics assumes that someone who's basically living by the good grace of affirmative action and either a government job or a white largesse has the right to tell a poor Black person who's been ground to powder because of the same system he's succeeding in that he needs to be uplifted so he can be more like him. It's a farce.
But Pascal, I mean, totally that person exists. And I would even grant you that person is the majority of people who have had my life experiences, the majority of the people I went to school with. God knows I know better than most how freaking frustrated and intractable these people are, as I have been arguing with them and frankly been excising them from my friend group over the last 4 or 5 years or so. However, I'm never going to give up an opportunity for solidarity. And I guess I just had this hesitation about painting with an overly broad brush. If you want to be a class traitor, excellent, great, fabulous, especially since I think a lot of the times the black people I know from my educational background cohort are in fact class traitors because like you and me have some personal experience that makes them feel like we're linked with the experiences of Black poor, even if we haven't experienced it personally. And I really take your point, Bertrand, about how our ability to represent that in pop culture and creative works and in the political sphere is not sufficient to replace the presence of people who are actually Black and poor. I grant that entirely. I just keep rubbing up against this idea that, again, that we should have this kind of class-based identity politics too, where we have this presumption that your class leads you to good politics if you're poor, or bad politics if you're middle class. The same way that there's plenty of Black people who don't do shit for Black people and have terrible opinions about things, and there's plenty of white people with good opinions about things, and everything across the spectrum. And it's the reason why we have a frustration with the weaponization of identity against left politics all the time.
I don't think we should romanticize either the Black poor or the Black elites in terms of what their politics are. I believe in the current political moment, they're all going to have crappy politics. Most people are going to have crappy politics because they have not been given political education. My position is that give political education to the people who are in the system who are being victimized the most, which are Black poor people primarily and Black working class people. And the people who are economically invested in the system because they're benefiting from the system and the system works for them, i.e. they love Black capitalism, i.e. they love their contracts with the government making nice money, are the people who are going to be less inclined to challenge that system. So my position is that it's not a matter that these people, I don't call Black people sellouts because they're not selling out. They're buying in. They're buying into their class position. They're buying into the economic reality that they live in. And I don't expect someone who was a lawyer working at an elite, blue blood law firm making $1 million a year to want to overthrow capitalism. And that's why I'll say, okay, you don't want to overthrow capitalism, but I just know you're a class enemy. Period.
Well, what about one who makes $200,000 a year and has $200,000 of student debt?
Okay, does he want to overthrow capitalism? Not. He's a class enemy.
First of all, she's a she.
Does she want to overthrow capitalism?
Yes, in part because, and this is what's so interesting to me. I look at my own example and I think to myself, well, if people like me who are so privileged and affluent relatively are feeling squeezed and like the social contract and the promise isn't delivered, right? Then to me, we're at a real revolutionary moment. Like, this isn't to say that this isn't, plaudits for me, but it's to say that if even someone in my position is willing to burn it all down because they're seeing so few benefits for them in terms of what was promised, having jumped through all of the hoops that society told you you're supposed to jump through, well, then imagine how everybody else is feeling. And you have these historical examples of like France 68, et cetera, where it was this kind of petit bourgeois class that does pop off first. And that to me, I wonder with the student debt moratorium now looming at the end of January and all of these other kinds of things, if we shouldn't just throw away the opportunity, the revolutionary potential of that group as well. And I understand this is very like self-serving and shut me down.
I would argue this. I think political education should be done where people are. I think that you should definitely do political education with those people. I think it will be futile. I've tried for over a decade. I think,
let me ask you this, Pascal. It's a specific question we got a while ago, and it was from Lisa for PG. What institutions do we need in order to begin deconstructing the capitalist, neoliberal, ideological superstructure you were talking about, and that Americans are indoctrinated into? If you have so little hope for this class of people, do you have any thoughts about how to reform them, or are you focused entirely on getting the Black working class and poor on board who were not on board and didn't vote enough in sufficient numbers in, say, Ohio's 11th district to make Senator Nina Turner a representative in Congress?
I had a suggestion and I presented it on our podcast. I presented it to a couple of people. I got mixed reactions.
Okay.
I said, since we know that the fulcrum of Black electoral politics, which is where most Black people engage in politically, is to the right of the white and multicultural left, that mostly white and multicultural left that we have now with the rise of DSA, Occupy, Sanders. You have a lot of college-educated white and multiracial people, even the Black Alliance for Peace, Black Power Media, all of these people, a lot of Rose Twitter, Marxist Leninists, everyone's into there's a new cadre of people, even though MSNBC doesn't want to acknowledge it, who are into Marxism, leftism, all that cadre. Yes, Black electoral politics is in the right flank of that politics in the Democratic Party. How do we collapse that reality? Someone asked institutions, and that's a very good question. And this was my proposition. Since we know that educated Black people love joining organizations, fraternities, sororities, the Links, the Boule, Freemasons, all of that other fat back and biscuit generating organizations that really do nothing for Black poor and working class folk, then why don't we suggest what is the organization that is more radical to where their politics are now, not as radical as maybe I would want, but radical enough to get them to see, okay, maybe there is something wrong with capitalism. Maybe we can elect people who will still be Democrats, because most of them are Democrats, who will challenge the status quo and challenge the system. Or maybe we can have coalitions with white people who are not totally racist. And my position was, why don't you take all of those Negroes who like their fraternities, the sororities, and links, and push DSA on them? Have them join an organization like DSA and take it over. And then they'll be able to do the outreach necessary to the Black proletariat and working class, because DSA has the infrastructure nationally to be able to be weaponized by those folk who have good organizational skills. Their politics are just messed up. DSA also has the political educational mechanisms that can be used to have them deconstruct why their politics are bad. And it can be used even though we all know DSA for my politics is kind of milquetoast, it's very radical for where their politics are right now. And it could be used as a radicalizing mechanism for that.
Okay, but Pascal, do you think these people are going to join DSA? I barely look. I'm a card-carrying DSA member, but I joined Socialist Alternative this year in part because I found so little sense of the sense of urgency that I have as a Black person. I don't always feel like is reflected in DSA, and I felt like some of the individuals who are very predominant online, at least in the organization, behaved in a way over the course of this year that felt very anti-solidaristic to me. And I found myself looking for an alternative. And I couldn't even in good faith, frankly, ask Black people. I mean, culturally, I think there's a bad fit between even the Issa Rae loving, Watchmen loving Black folks, Links, Boule, and DSA. I mean, what is the point of overlap between these two groups where they have anything in common?
One thing is that, first of all, it's ironic, Brianna, because you're the one saying, well, we should give some hope to these folk and not throw them all,
Well, because of their racial identity. I think that someone like Issa Rae, if told, I know that I feel like I could get her in a room. If I were in a room with her, I can make a pitch to her about why she shouldn't support someone like Kamala Harris, about why she should consider someone like Bernie Sanders, based on what I know about her and her background. Because I would make a pitch explicitly to her sense of racial identity. I know I can't make a class argument to her. She went to Stanford. I get it. But out of a sense of pure racial identity, Issa, don't you care about the maternal mortality rate? Issa, don't you care about the student loan debt crisis disproportionately affecting Black women? Okay, I can make that pitch. The pitch to Issa Rae about why she should join an organization that superficially seems like a bunch of white Brooklyn hipsters, I don't even know what I would tell her. I don't even know what I would tell her.
You're proving my point. Her ridiculous race reductionist politics makes her a class enemy, and it's not going to change.
But no, Pascal, I think I could get her potentially, and if not
for anything else. I think you're wrong, because she wants to go to the Vineyard and hang out and see Kamala Harris.
And look, I honestly, I don't care if she goes to the Vineyard. If she's going to vote for someone who will instate a wealth tax or push for Medicare for all or $15 minimum wage.
She wants to be at Obama's birthday party.
Right, but to be honest, Pascal, Bernie Sanders and the kind of Bernie Sanders, ultimately, the grand scheme of the world, it's like a reformist. Like, we're not talking about some big cataclysmic interventions here. We're not actually, I mean, maybe we are, but in terms of electoral politics, no one's talking about overturning the state. So there's nothing that Bernie Sanders is going to do that prevents her from going to the vineyard and feeling special because she's hobnobbing with Obama.
But we're agreeing. You're saying you're saying that you think that just on a racial level, you can say, listen, girl,
I can get her to vote for Bernie. I'm not going to get her to vote for tearing it all down, but I can get her to vote for a Bernie-style politician.
If these people were going to vote for Bernie, they would have done it. These people helped Bernie Sanders get kiboshed.
Well, some of them did, but some of them just stayed.
Most of them did. Unless
even Ta-Nehisi Coates voted for Bernie. Now, I have all the critiques in the world of Ta-Nehisi Coates.
After he stuck a 6-inch knife
into
his candidacy.
And Pascal, I have written at length about that and talked to him at length about that. But the reality is, even the reason I bring him up is because of how antagonistic he has been about Bernie publicly. Even he, despite those antagonisms, voted for Bernie. And that's why I believe that there is, because of the animus for someone like Coates might not like Bernie, but he does understand on some level how toxic Hillary Clinton was for Black people. And ultimately, that's what drove his decision. And I can make that kind of argument, I believe, more easily with someone like Issa Rae than a white person of her same class background. And I think there's an opportunity there.
If you both don't mind, I think I see that what the disconnect is between you two, and it's just the position you're kind of coming from. Like, Pascal is basically saying, like, if they actually cared, they would already be where you are. Like, they ignorant. Yeah, but I don't see. But like, I don't think ultimately, I don't know if like Issa Rae cares. I'm like, Ta-Nehisi Coates could have done anything, written any article he wanted. Yeah. He wrote an article attacking Bernie Sanders. Like, I understand like the want to win these people all over, but like, you don't have to work that hard to win like the 1,000 people watching this stream over. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so it's like, so it's
not. Here's the point. I don't care if it's Issa Rae. My priority is not Issa Rae. All I'm saying is don't throw away Issa Rae unnecessarily. But the point is, the 1,000 people who are watching this stream don't make Bernie Sanders president. You don't make Nina Turner in Congress.
So how do you get? Isn't going to do it either.
Right, but how do you get? First of all, I just don't believe in throwing away votes. I'm not going to throw away a vote from a conservative who's doesn't have health care, who I might be able to reach. I'm not going to throw away votes. So you're not going to convince me to say anybody's vote is trash, because that's just not where I'm coming from politically.
I'm not saying we should reach out. I agree.
What I'm saying is, what is their plan? And the question that someone put out there before was, what is the plan for getting any of these people in any class cohort? Because the Issa Rae votes. The problem is changing Issa Rae's politics, but not getting her to vote. Alternatively, how do you get someone who is actually poor and Black, who you might have a better political pitch to, an easier political pitch to, but who doesn't actually vote? Because that was an issue in Ohio's 11th, where Nina Turner won all the predominantly Black districts. The districts that were more affluent and disproportionately white went to Shontel Brown.
My position will be this, is that, okay, you said that you don't believe that. Now, I understand why. And by the way, I was not a member of DSA when I made that. I actually joined DSA subsequently. And many people were like, oh my God, why would you do that? And even people who I know, who I respect, who speak at DSA functions, an academic who's been on our podcast, who they quote all the time, was like, we're at the stage right now that some people are using DSA as a resume builder, basically. So the class politics of DSA, because it tends to be basically PMC white folk, makes it pretty difficult for it to be that institute. I wasn't just talking about having, these Black upper middle class folks just join. I said, take it over. DSA only has about 70,000 people. It wouldn't be hard. You take the graduate and alumni chapters of every fraternity and sorority in every city where the DSA chapter haven't joined DSA, they take over the chapter.
I agree with that, but Pascal, like I can't imagine. I mean, going to these to the Divine Nine is like going into the heart of the lion's den.
Guess what?
Those are the worst, like politically.
Are you telling me? Like, I've been an alpha since I was 18 years old.
So that's why Pascal, I don't understand why of all of the Black, Issa Rae to me is not a checks and like, she might like Kamala. I don't know her personally, but what I do know about Issa Rae is that, for example, she's friends with and went to college with Mondaire Jones, who is not hardly the most radical member of the squad, but is considered to be a squad member. And and who went to law school with me.
Okay. Let me tell
Right?
you why I'd start with the fraternities and sororities. You
Okay.
will not puncture the ideological superstructure of Black politics without getting the change in fraternities and sororities. They're endemic. They're everywhere.
I agree, but you think you're going to do that by convincing them to join the DSA?
Let me tell you something right now. Someone whose radio show I've appeared on several times, former Black Panther, comes from the Black elite, who I love dearly. Her name is Janice Pete Graham. She's very known in the African American community. She's the 28th Delta in her family. Okay. I talked about my idea. She lives in West Palm Beach. You know what she said?
What did she say?
I might think about joining DSA.
Okay. Look, I'm here for it. I'm here for it if it works. I'm just.
Let me tell you right now. Let me tell you what part of the problem is.
Okay.
They don't have. Like, these are people. By the way, we're talking about the problems with racism in the DSA. These are people who are card-carrying life member Democrats who've been working with people like the current president, Joe Biden. They're people who've been dealing with people like the Clintons. If you think that they're going to be more turned off dealing with a bunch of postgraduate sock dems in DSA who are too woke to be a joke, compared to the old guard racist, rednecky folk that they've been dealing with in the Democratic Party particularly for that generation, I think that they would run through and over that infrastructure in DSA, and they would take the organization over like that.
Racism doesn't bother them. Like they understand white people are racist. Black people aren't turned off by racism. They know Joe Biden is Jim Crow Joe. Like they don't. That is not that's not the issue. As long as Jim Crow Joe panders to them though and says we're going to give you a Black Supreme Court justice, we're going to give you a Black VP. That's how they get invested in those people. The DSA people,
the Democratic infrastructure gives them patronage, fat pack and business.
Correct. But the DSA people aren't going to do that. Half the DSA people think that identity politics, that race doesn't matter, and that DSA, and that identity politics is just all bad, and that the culture of DSA, I think, is inhospitable to those people because they don't know how to do the backslapping and glad handing that Joe Biden is so good at that makes Black people trust him because he knows how to bend the knee. I don't see the DSA people bending the knee to Catholics.
DSA was a trial balloon. It doesn't have to be a DSA. This has to be an organization with a similar national infrastructure that has enough influence within the Democratic Party to get an elected representative like AOC in the party. Socialist Alternative hasn't gotten anybody in Congress yet. That's why I chose.
Yeah, it's very small. People should consider joining it. Wait,
my point is that what those Black people understand is that right now, the American ruling class is more intimidated by AOC than the whole Congressional Black Caucus. And that's a fact. And they do know that AOC comes out of the DSA. So if they understand that they can replicate more Black AOCs by joining an organization like the DSA that will help them weaponize their politics and actually take it to another level and actually replicate that to their own cultural and racial likings, they would probably join.
I'd love Diana Presley and all of them tell Black people to join the DSA. Go ahead, Leslie. I'm sorry.
I literally just had a vision of the entire cast of Mixed-ish at a DSA meeting, and I can see it. I see the vision you have, because I mean it presents a lot of opportunities I don't know. I think a lot the people you're talking about could get a lot out. Could they get the same thing that some white people get out of DSA? I think that this could be. I think your plan could work. I think it could work. I think it legs. I'm sorry, it's an opportunity, because when I was at the DNC, what I noticed so much, I saw these poor Black women, poor Hispanic women come up and say things like, "Oh, I'm gonna run for Congress. Oh, I'm gonna do this. Oh, I'm gonna do that." Would be AOCs, but they didn't have any infrastructure. They didn't have any support. And I saw the highfalutin white people in the DNC who actually run the party, and those women have no way of getting in there. Those local people have no way of getting in there. If DSA is a shortcut, I don't know. Maybe.
I hope you're right. I would love to see them try. My only issue is with the cultural choices the DSA is making now. I find them to be extremely hostile to everything that I know about what makes Black people value the
Brooklyn
prestige
DSA
of
is
Black
not
work.
like the whole.
But wait a minute. I want to
whole
run through. I got to be an administrator. I've been ignoring all of these questions. Can you guys address the questions on the screen from Faria Mardani? Why the assumption that middle class folks have only have bad politics because of their money and not because of breakable capitalist state brainwashing?
The capitalist realism. I think it's not just the money; it's the capitalist realism of us living in a society where the primacy of capitalism is realized by all the institutions, from the base to the ideological superstructure, everything. So I agree with that. It's not just the money. Listen, most revolutions in the world were started by elites or petit bourgeois. You go to Cuba, Fidel Castro was an elite. So there's no question that you can have people become class traitors. Amilcar Cabral was another elite. Nelson Mandela was an elite.
Yeah, some of the best people are class traitors. Like, cheers.
Yes, usually the leaders of revolutions have been class traitors. They are an exception to the rule.
What's that, Bertrand?
Oh yeah, I just want to throw this out because I was thinking, and this was going back a ways now to when you were talking about the people that you've gone to work with who have sort of come out of Black poverty and like made their way through. That you've gone to work with politically, and just also thinking about the voting numbers of the Black poor, and just something like for me, I made it out in no small part because I'm very comfortable with the politics. I like the politics and the different groups in my major, just because I fit in with that stream. And there's this whole group of poor Black people who actually don't share those politics. Like if I go back home and talk to people, it's not a very leftist space. It's not a very liberal space most of the time. Sort of what Pascal was talking about. It's just like a lot of folks sound pretty right, except for the fact that they will vote Democrat. And I find that this is kind of a blind spot when I see after every election doesn't go the way that whichever particular group wanted it to go. There's just a slew of articles explaining all the people who didn't come up and do their part. And every once in a while, I'll see folks address that the Black poor are very apolitical, but it's not treated as serious as I think it should be. That a lot of times these folks just I barely heard about politics growing up, to be honest with you. Politicians were just crooks of people that you couldn't trust. And that was kind of the beginning and end of the story. And I never really experienced that many people trying to speak to like the bulk. You would see some people who they were organizing through church, but for whatever reason, they were the Leslie Nopes in this group and just like had that political motivation, but it was not common. And I still don't see many people appreciating how detached the Black poor are from a lot of these political bodies. And you really only see that conversation when people are trying to drum up votes. But to reference a class traitor like Paulo Freire, who did the Pedagogy of the Oppressed and talked at length about how difficult it is to go to an oppressed group. You're going to grab it? Yeah. To talk to an oppressed group and actually get them to a place where first you can have a conversation on somewhat equal footing, and then they can start trying to dictate what their values and what sort of world they want to live in is. And it's a very slow process that just doesn't fit in neatly with trying to get votes quickly or match the election cycle. And yeah, I just want to bring up like how detached this group is. Like they're so just not brought in, and how difficult it would be to bring them in. And so
I think that's a really important point. I think that's really important, Bertrand, and I want to stay right there. I want us to like really sink in the saddle on that one, because that to me is the fundamental question about AOC, about not AOC, S&T, Nina Turner, about Bernie, about all of these people who have come so close and lost. And Nina Turner and Bernie are very different insofar as Nina Turner actually won the majority of the Black vote, it seems right now from what we can tell with the numbers being what they are, but was actually felled by increased turnout in an open primary in more affluent, wider parts of town. Now, that wouldn't matter. That's going to happen. We're going to get big money, outside money groups doing that kind of mobilization always. So at a certain point, we have to stop belaboring that fact, even though it's true, and start talking about how we actually get the working class and poor to turn out in numbers, since they are, in fact, the bulk of the population in the districts that we needed to win, that she needed to win. And one of the things that I observed from being in Cleveland and following her around for all of Sunday is this role of the church. Holy smokes. If you haven't listened to our episode, our Senator Turner episode from last week, please strongly consider it, because I was at this mega church where Shontel Brown had been invited to speak. Nina Turner's campaign found out the night before about this, and wrangled an invitation that she could be there as well. This is like the biggest church around. It's about 5 minutes from my grandmother's house. So I rolled out of bed Sunday morning after getting there and ran over there with a quickness. Who was in the pews? The owner of the Cleveland Browns, sitting there looking as rich as, carrot cake. Who got all the shout outs from the preacher in the world. This is a man who gave to Donald Trump in 2016, but who has a rehabilitation arc apparently based on having like a heart-to-heart with the pastor over the George Floyd protests and the murder itself. Or maybe it wasn't George Floyd. Maybe it might have been over maybe it was, I don't remember, but one of the Black Lives Matter protests, he and the pastor spoke at length about. It might have been Tamir Rice. Anyway, the pastor tried to put on a veneer of impartiality, but it was clear that he had a relationship with Shontel Brown. Jim Clyburn shows up and sits next to Shontel Brown as support. And last minute, Keith Ellison has to be pulled in from another service that he was going to sit next to Nina Turner so that she similarly had some kind of a national major Black public figure in her corner, so it didn't seem so imbalanced. And the guest pastor for the day was this 40-year-old kind of young, hip, white preacher that had like tattoos and was, a runner, lean, those cool pastor types who gave a whole sermon about personal responsibility that the crowd ate up. And this is the environment. This is the ground zero for convincing Black people that they should take one political lane or another. So that being the setting, and perhaps one of the best ways to access a poor working class group of Black folks, how do we overcome the immense pressure? All of it, it was the most capitalist. There were laser lights. There was a 15-person band. There was the owner of the Cleveland Browns. How do you get past that kind of a cultural barrier to actually accessing Black people on class lines and convincing them that they should vote in their own class interests?
This goes back. We talked about this on the show last time I was on it. How does Black politics work? Very simple. Again, how does Clyburn do what he does every year, every 4 years in South Carolina? What does Clyburn have? All the HBCU presidents, he has their phone number in his Rolodex. All the fraternity and sorority graduate and alumni chapters, he has their presidents in their Rolodex. What is that? That's all your teachers, your principals, and your administrators in your Black high schools. That's also your Black pastors and ministers in your Black churches as well. He has the phone number of all of the major pastors and minor pastors in the Black churches. And what he does is that he can go to the Democratic Party and its corporate acolytes, extract concessions for them, patronage, fatback and biscuits, and dole it out to all of those constituencies to make sure they get his political fealty. One of the reasons why I knew Bernie Sanders was not going to win is that Bernie Sanders doesn't have that infrastructure. And even if he had all those people in the Rolodex, Bernie Sanders does not have the relationship with a corporate mechanism to give patronage out, fatback and biscuits to all those people and keep them loyal to him. He does not. So the only way you're going to penetrate that ideological superstructure is that you have to appeal to poor and working class Black people on the ground and tell them why that politics is failing them. And you also have to have some kind of organizational structure, whether it is the DSA, whether it is the Socialist Workers Party, that can peel away the people who have the highest role in that society. And you know who they are? Those fraternity and sorority Negroes. Jim Clyburn is a member of Omega Psi-Phi. Look at the Congressional Black Caucus and look at what kind of organizations they're affiliated with. They're all fraternity and sorority Negroes. I know these Negroes, okay?
Do we think they have a brand?
Yeah. I want to throw out there that when you are Black and poor and you are very apolitical, this does put popular culture in a very... it makes it prominent in your life as one of the ways that you get to know about what is going on in the cultural mainstream outside of your neighborhoods, and something that Pascal alluded to, and many Black people are old enough to be like my dad or my grandfather, or, grandparents, they don't care for most of, I'll pick rap and hip hop as like a key point. One of the ways that many mainstream liberals and people just who aren't right show their solidarity with Blackness is through rap and hip hop and the celebrating of these different rappers as artists, and it's things I love the music. My grandparents do not care for it. They still sound very much like the 90s and the 80s. It sounds exactly like they think it's nothing but sagging pants and just like putting Black people in a bad spot or a spotlight.
They also like respectability politics and personal responsibility.
And so when you have,
my dad played Cameo around my grandmother once, and she almost had a conniption. Cameo, it's like candy.
Yeah, we have all these Black poor people who are getting to know what they think, because they don't really discern between liberal and left. They're getting this understanding that what the mainstream non-right folks like are all these features of Black culture that they don't personally like or celebrate. It creates a lot of distrust that makes them just think like, yeah, I don't like anything that person is celebrating about the Black culture. It's so when you go to the church, you get to see that on display, because the church is all these folks who have nothing but criticisms about many of the features like rap or hip hop or, any of the, I'll say the people who are very anti-respectability politics. Those are the people they see getting put on, and they disagree with them. When you go to the Black church, you get to see all that disagreement there on all those people who don't like what the mainstream celebrates about Black culture.
Let me say this again.
Sorry, go ahead.
Let's look at those institutions. HBCUs, Black churches, Black teachers unions, Black fraternities and sororities. Do you know what's common amongst all those institutions that's leveraged by the Black political class and the Black political class themselves? They're all run by and controlled by people who are in Black fraternities and sororities. The linchpin key to maintaining listen, Black fraternities and sororities are the training ground for the Black misleadership class. That's where you learn your parliamentary procedure. That's where you learn to network. That's where you learn to submit a motion. All of the stuff you learn in politics. That's why these Negroes excel at doing the treachery they do when they get into election office. They've been doing this since they were teenagers. Okay.
Well, one point that was made about the Ohio 11th race was that Chantel Brown actually doesn't come from that background. There was a lot about the messaging around her that I think really played on colorism and class dynamics, painting her as kind of the nice, acceptable, lighter skinned middle class.
That was a problem with Nina Turner. Yep.
Protagonist to Nina Turner, who seemed more like a fighter, brown skinned woman, working class.
I heard for the first time, I never knew this. For the first time after the Nina Turner election, I saw people calling Nina Turner ghetto on social media. I was like, what?
Yeah,
middle class, older Black people, usually around a little older than me, in their early 60s, late 50s. They're like, Nina Turner too ghetto.
Yeah, and I definitely, and people should definitely listen to our episode. I interviewed a lovely woman at the church service who was torn because she was Chantel Brown's grandmother was her prayer partner, and so she felt like she was looking to see what she said was, I'm looking to see if the qualities I see in her grandmother are in her granddaughter. On the other hand, she's like, I would have voted for Bernie Sanders. This is someone who's like my grandmother's age. I would have voted for Bernie Sanders if he, had been in the general election, and I really like Bernie. And she said, Nina Turner seemed like a fighter. And when she said that, at first I thought she was going to be negative. This was a lighter skinned Black woman, I thought that maybe she meant that negative way. But what she actually went on to say was like, back in my day, I used to know how to take my earrings off and get into it. I like that she's a fighter. And I like that in one of her ads, she's wearing a leopard print outfit. So it's all across the board, but that's to say, like, there was definitely a class and colorist dynamic going on, but Chantel Brown does not actually come from an elite class background in the least. I think, went to a not particularly elite college and did not pledge, is my understanding of events.
Well,
but to your point, Pascal, she was manufactured. That was the image that was put around her. They took her and they put her in these, they filmed these ads with her mom sitting in like a cushy. I watched these ads. I was like, I don't know what white lady's house this woman's sitting in, but it is not her mom's house. Like, with all this Pottery Barn furniture around, talking about, like, you know, all this like respectability politics, you know, parade of why you should vote for Shontel Brown. And I think that was effective for a lot of people.
But Nina Turner won the majority of the black vote. It didn't work for black. This is my point. Simple question. St. Louis, all guard black political class. All in the South and the Midwest, all of that Freemasons, the Links, Jack and Jill, black fraternities and sororities, all that fat back and biscuits nonsense is big in the South. How does Cori Bush beat Lacey Clay, who is a kingmaker in the black political class?
Tell me how.
She went out and told poor and working class black people in those communities that these Negroes sell you out, and they know it.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask this question, because Landrew, the big spender over here with his $100 donation, thank you so much, asks, thank you, love this discussion. Now who will be our leader, or do we need one now that Bernie is gone? There was a woman that I spoke to.
Did he die? Bernie is
Well,
gone.
I think when people ask that question,
I understand what he means, but let's
well, what they want to know is, a lot of people, you know, when they talk about being a leader, they actually mean, and I don't want to put words in Landrew's mouth, but they mean who's going to also be president. And one of the women I interviewed for that episode in Cleveland did say that she was fighting for Nina in part because she felt like she was someone who could inherit that mantle and work her way up and be president of the United States, and that the fish rots from the head. And the only way to really overturn the entrenched establishment infrastructure that you're describing, Pascal, with all of this, you know, boule black business, is to just get someone at the top, like Senator Turner, who would just like cut off the blood flow to all of those patronage systems.
By the way, let's make this clear. Nina Turner is a member of the black political class. I mean, that's a fact. I wouldn't call it the black misleadership class, but she is part of the black political class.
Well, that'll get you in trouble, Pascal. Saying anything along those, saying that there was,
She wouldn't be that.
Needed to push her like they push any other politician in Congress, has gotten me into a little bit of hot water on Twitter today.
I would like Nina Turner to ask her if she would deny that she's a member. She's a member. Do you think there's anything we're talking about how black politics works right now that Nina Turner doesn't know? She knows. No. She is completely aware. She wouldn't deny any of this. She was like, yeah, that's exactly how it works. The question is, how do we penetrate this? And I think the best thing Nina needs to do is to talk to Cori Bush, because Cori Bush did what seemed to be impossible. She defeated the black political class on their own turf where they had been strong and took them out.
Cori Bush took 2 times to do it. So
yes, she did.
Yeah. Well, Bertrand, I'm curious because, for one, I don't want to do kind of like, I don't want to like make you put your business on Front Street and you can explain to the extent that you're comfortable. But I wondered if you would tell our listeners a little bit about your background, and also if you have, you know, drawing on that, what insights you might have as to what would enable your family members to connect with a left message. Some of your poor family members to connect with a kind of a Bernie style or even more to the left revolutionary message.
Yeah. So my background, pretty straightforward until, I mean, it's in the article for the most part, but so black and white, obviously everybody picked that up. My dad is the black member of my family. He was in prison for manslaughter from the time I was 3 months old till I was about 16. I was with my mom until I was 14. Both sides of my family are poor, both white and black. Around 14, my mom's substance abuse problem meant that I had to go with a grandmother. Then she booted me. Then I was with the state. Then I left the state of Florida illegally to come back to like hometown New Jersey, and pretty much just floated around in between foster transients until I could just be an old-fashioned impoverished adult until around 26, when graduate school allowed me to get a job that got me out of that. So for my family, and I'll focus on the black side, it's, you know, I'm not as deep in poverty as some other folks are, where they're like 3-4 generations. My family was like 2 generations before me in poverty. And they practice a lot of the respectability politics. My dad got out of prison, and hearing him talk about poor people, he mostly just thinks that they're lazy and they should get it, you know, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. He would have been very comfortable with, you know, the Bill Cosby pound cake speech and all that stuff. That whole tour would have been right up his alley. I think the biggest thing for those Black people and for my friends, I'm making it sound like it's only older folks who didn't like rap or sagging pants, but I've watched friends that I grew up get a little bit older, find some stability, get, you know, some type of job, and then suddenly they don't like poor folks either. And the poor Black people who are still struggling need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and it just kind of repeats. It's really the policy. It's talking about what the left would do for them, because most of the things that they're concerned about are things that I only hear the left be concerned about, things that have to do with housing and schools and jobs and healthcare and wages and all that. But for whatever reason, they have a really hard time getting to that point in the conversation when they're talking about the actual policy changes. Very often they're too put off by the person who is bringing that information to them, whether it's on the TV or what have you, where they just think that that person is bougie and distant and like liberal, but not in a way that they really care for, liberal in a way where like they see that person as basically mostly just wanting Black people to take a handout, is how I'd put it. So it's really just the culture around the presentation that I would emphasize. If there was some way to cut through that and get straight to talking about how somebody like Bernie Sanders, like, here is what he will do for this community, here's the things that he would fix, that's really the focus. Now, how long would it take to not only discuss those things that Bernie would do, but develop, how do I put it, momentum for a group of people who don't vote, who don't even, it's so distant for you. It's not where you spend your energy. You don't think about doing it. And it's almost like good financial skill. Like, not only do people know how to manage their finances when they come from other class groups, there's a motivation, there's a sense of identity that comes with being the type of person who manages their finances well. I come from a group of people who really don't have a sense of, oh, I'm the type of person who has good politics, who is involved in the political process. That's part of my identity. It's just not there for that group of people. So a combination of somehow building that and finding someone or some group of people who can deliver that message without offending the sensibility of those church-going Black people that you saw who are still kind of beholden to respectability politics and people that they think are like upright and like put out that good image. It's difficult.
So what you're saying is that what you're saying is that Killer Mike isn't the best avatar for this project.
Unfortunately, because I love Killer Mike, but
same.
Yeah, there are a lot of Black people who are poor, who have been hurt, and who would be helped by every single policy that Killer Mike mentions, but they see Killer Mike and they think of rap and they're just done. They just they don't get past that.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, sir, go ahead, please go ahead.
Yeah, because I'm from, Louisiana, the 70805 zip code, and BBC did a documentary. In fact, I think I can show it, and they called it the worst zip code in America initially when they posted the video, and then they had to repost it with a less offensive. And this is where I spent most of my life. And if I wanted to like reach in these people, it's just like, reach them for what? Like, if they vote, if every single poor person in 70805 voted for every single Democrat every single election, what would happen? What difference would it make? Louisiana has a Democratic governor right now. If you want, you can Google what he's done for Black people since he's been governor. So I understand it's an important question how you reach these people, but where are you reaching them for? And about the Nina Turner race, I'm like, all that money, couldn't they both have run in different races? It just seemed to me like a waste of resources. There's a movie, in fact, that came out a couple of years ago, 1 year ago, by Jon Stewart called Irresistible, which was about exactly this: a small, ultimately like not that important race that became super political because of party politics, and you had all this money, all these consultants flying in, that big thing in the mega church. I don't know if that seat is worth all that and all that attention, all that money, especially when there's states where Democrats don't even run candidates. So
Yeah.
so
This
that's
is the
just too much.
question that got me in so much trouble. Is it worth it? If you see that the establishment is going to mobilize to the extent that it did, putting $2 million last minute into this race, peppering that more affluent areas with, Nina Turner doesn't, hates Israel kind of flyering to get the desired result and will spend no amount of money to prevent progressive momentum. Is this the battlefield we should be trying to fight for the left on? Is electoralism always going to run up against these kind of problems? And is the juice worth the squeeze?
I don't think electoralism is the solution. We need to mobilize and organize poor and working class people to start a movement that can put pressure on the candidates and politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And I think that the mistake that this new iteration of the left made was believing that electoral politics without a prior created movement is going to be the answer to the question and create the left politics we need. And we find the conundrum that we're in right now, when all that ends up happening is that those elected officials are asked to make a united front with the neoliberals in the fear of the Trumps and the fascists and all that other stuff. While we could have had a serious political movement and done things like what Cori Bush did and actually pressure them to actually change their political trajectory. By the way,
but Pascal, Cori Bush is in Congress. Cori Bush,
right? But
Cori Bush
I believe
would have been in a position to do that.
And outside strategy. It's not just one or the other.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that I believe you start with the outside first and then move to the inside. My partner Jason Miles said he's giving you a super chat. Do you see it? This is Revolution. He asked me. Can you ask Brianna too? Jason Miles, this is Revolution podcast.
Oh yes. Okay. If you guys will let me, I have been screen grabbing the chats that go, because for some point they go too far back and I can't access them anymore, but I've been screen grabbing them as they come. And so I have his, and I'm going to read them off now. I haven't been wanting to interrupt the flow of conversation, but if you want me to, I will read them off now. This is Revolution podcast. Asked, can Bree settle a debate for Pascal and I? Totes McGoats. What's the follow-up question, though? So please put your follow-up question and I will read it. Tony DeMio says, in 2018, there were 3 movies about police brutality. What do you think about that? Do you want more films about that issue? Let's throw that to Bertrand.
Do I want? That's a difficult question. I'm not sure that I want there to be more films about police brutality necessarily. Yeah, I don't have I'm sorry, I'm answering this question terribly. I don't necessarily want there to be more films about police brutality. I guess the closest I could get to answering that is that I would like there to be more poor Black people who have the opportunity to write the stories about their experiences. And if they choose to beat that number and aim for 5, 6, 7, 8 movies about police brutality, then I would support it. But no, what ultimately comes from empowering poor Black people to create more and in more prominent spaces, I don't have my own opinion as to like how much of any slice of poor Black life gets depicted.
I want to remind folks, while I have you, there's over 1,000 people watching this stream. We're very close to getting 50,000 followers to the channel. I think a lot of you have really appreciated the content we've been putting out. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe and also hit the notification bell. That way, next time we do an impromptu stream like this, you won't miss it. So subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll stop this annoying banner if you do that, please.
Brianna, don't forget to announce that you'll be on This is Revolution podcast this Thursday.
I will be. Please. What are we talking about, Pascal?
We're going to be talking about what we talked about today, which is Black politics and the left, and how to expand expand the Overton window in Black communities to left politics. So you kind of preempted the whole subject matter by doing that.
We can obviously talk about this for hours on end, Pascal, because this is, it can be sometimes frustrating to feel like, we're kind of chewing around the same issues over and over again. But to me, what gets frustrating on the left is when people, instead of having these difficult conversations and challenging each other and pushing up against the real challenges that exist on the left, just attack each other out of a sense of frustration that answering these questions is in fact difficult. It is going to take time and we don't have answers. I would hate to think that the qualification for having a podcast or being on a platform is to know the solution to a question. I brought all of you here today and bring all of our guests in because I think there's something that I can learn from them. And I'm not coming to these conversations fully formed like Athena from the head of Zeus. Like this is about growth. And I really appreciate all of you for helping me to grow and to do that. Let me rattle off. There's two more. Hot Channels said that working class and the underclass poor live in the same neighborhoods in NYC. This is the question about how much of a right, middle class or working class Blacks have to telling the stories of working class people and pointing to the fact that there is a certain degree of because redlining and a whole lot of historical reasons that the Black middle class tends to be in closer living proximity to the Black poor than other groups. Thoughts?
Yeah, a few thoughts. One, I just want to reemphasize working class is a much broader income spectrum than most people think. And maybe the bottom of the working class are living there, or possibly, depending on the district and the history that you brought up, Bree, it might be some of the higher earning working class are living in that same area. And so they are in proximity. But so wide spectrum, just saying the working class in some areas live there isn't the same as saying every working class member, even people making $70,000 a year, are living right in the ghetto. Moving on from that, I think it's really important to like hone in on this experience that when these folks, they're living close to each other, but that still is not making their worlds exactly the same. It's very different to come home to food, for one. Even if you live a few houses apart from someone, it's very different to come home to food. It's very different to come home to lights being on. It's very different to come home and have parents who are working and are engaging in that sort of structure. It's all very different. So you might be on the same block. And so there are going to be types of quote unquote Black oppressions, which are really most of the times the ones that most afflict poor Black people that you're going to have in common. Dangerous to go outside, possibly getting shot. You're going to be in an area where police harassment is going to be extremely high. Police violence is going to be high. And so I accept all those things. And if that person has those experiences and then chooses to make art about them and chooses to build themselves as truthful on that, go for it. But there's still going to be these other parts of the experience that define poverty, which for me, especially because I spent, during those years that I mentioned, I was either 14 and 15, I was either stealing food from grocery stores or spending my entire lunch break basically begging other students for enough change to maybe get something from the vending machine. And that would be my food for the day. So even if somebody lives next door to me, they may be going home to food if they're working class and I'm poor. And that's just to list one biological deficit that I'm experiencing that they may not be. So for me, all those nuances matter. I would never take away from somebody if they live in a dangerous neighborhood and they want to build their art about a dangerous neighborhood as authentic. If you had that experience and you know that, go for it. But nuances all matter to me.
I think your point about people who build themselves as something that they are not, as in some ways Donald Glover has explicitly admitted to, and Dave Chappelle has explicitly admitted to. And again, people should definitely go and read the article. It's linked in the description of our episode from last Thursday with Bertrand and Damon Young from Smart Brothers, and obviously it's on Current Affairs. You can go and find it there. He gives a lot of really specific data about how elite truly and disconnected from experiences of the working of the Black poor are from the people who are making all of this content about the Black poor and these very specific opportunities that are emerging because of these very public instances of violence against poor Black people, like George Floyd's murder. I don't want to, I know that we've been going long. There's a lot of questions that have queued up from patrons, which I told them that I would prioritize. Lisa says, can you answer my super chat that I asked initially? Lisa, I thought I just read that off. Lisa what institutions do we need in order to begin deconstructing the capitalist neoliberal ideological superstructure Americans are indoctrinated into? I thought we handled that, Lisa.
We did.
Jason said he asked what to answer the debate question. He thinks Leslie might have an answer. What's the debate question that Jason asked?
I didn't get the question, but he should. If you put it in the chat, Jason, and you don't have to give money, but if we see it, we'll read it. Shabi says, Mod Dim, I asked 2 legit questions about how AOC is able to work with moderate Dims, whereas Nina can't. If you can't address that, you can't move forward. So I think, I mean, in part, there's the Cori Bush example where you can say, despite maybe some disappointments around some other things, $15 minimum wage, forced the vote, she did take this stand that seemed to have a real material effect here over the eviction moratorium. So there was obviously some real value to electoralism. Go ahead, Pascal.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that if you're going to be in the left flank of the Democratic Party, you should use shame and calling out the Democrats as a means to get political concessions, and basically hold them accountable and be able to actually extract for them the concessions that you need.
I'm bringing Andray into the chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here.
Hey, how's it going?
Introduce yourself to our audience who don't already know you from our recent episode.
Oh, yeah. My name is Q, also known as Andray Domise. I write with McLean's Magazine, a national publication in Canada, a freelance writer, and multi-purpose Twitter shit poster.
Blackberry White says, that's a hilarious name. Check out Pascal's recent appearance on Macro and Cheese with Steve Grumbine on the Haitian Revolution. It's a really great one that opened my eyes. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to get into some of these. Wait, one more. Aka says, if Black fraternities and sororities and or churches help neolibs get elected, how will them taking over DSA or some other organization help the left?
The political education of DSA is supposed to help them change their politics to a more class-basis, anti-capitalist agenda. That's the purpose. That's why I would choose a DSA or even a socialist workers' alternative, because they get a political education that helps at least try to reform their politics.
All right. I'm going to post a post from Zach from the Patreon, who asks, what are your thoughts on how the general strike rumored to happen in October is going to go down? Great job with the pod. Thank you, Zach. Thoughts? Has anyone heard much about this general strike? If you haven't heard about it, that might be some inclination of how it's going to go down.
I haven't heard about it.
I mean, what do you think about this question? So all the time, there are people on the left who periodically would bring up the idea of a general strike, and the kind of like professional left organizers will say, we're not organized enough, we're not ready, there's not enough union density, et cetera, all of which I think is very historically rooted in a legitimate response. However, there are also these historical examples of revolutions and strikes popping off where there hasn't been organization. And to me, there's this interesting push and pull between how much we should keep the door open, as Bruno Mars might say, to a moment like France 68, given that we just had this kind of uprising last summer, given that we are on an economic precipice that's unprecedented since the Gilded Age, et cetera. And there doesn't seem to be often a room to even kind of have a conversation about what that would look like or what the organizing to get there would look like. Thoughts?
I mean, I think that if you're going to do an action like that, it has to be done in a way that's going to be effective. So if it's going to be a general strike, you should hit all labor components from hotels, restaurants, food chains, hospitals, and so on and so forth. And unless you can actually penetrate that deeply into working sectors, don't do it, because if you do it and it's just insignificant in numbers, it's not going to happen. I think something like that takes phenomenal amounts of organization. It can work, but if you're going to do a workers' strike, you want a workers' strike that's going to shut down the efficacy of capitalism's functioning in American society. So it's got to be big, strong, and you got to do it right.
Mm. I mean, Masha here has a question about workers who perhaps are being kind of forced back into work and how they should be thinking of safety given COVID and all the stuff about the variants that's going on right now. I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that.
Just take the precautions that you best can.
Yeah. I mean, this is a broader, I think, worker rights issue that is kind of linked into the conversations that are happening about the PRO Act and the eventuality of that ever getting passed. We have a question from Kyle R. Conway. Picture this. It's 1 week from now. Voting Rights Act has not passed, and everything is further gerrymandered for the next decade. Things continue to get worse. Climate, income inequality, gestures broadly around it, everything, much of it on fire. What's the plan? How are the faithful to be mobilized?
We have to go out into the spaces where working class and poor people are, get a gymnasium, go to the churches, go to the lodges, the Masonic halls, and where they are, and start talking to people on the ground. and basically tell them about ask them what their political demands are, what their politics are, and help radicalize them to a transformative politics, and putting pressures on the actual ruling class and political candidates that we have in this country. You got to talk to people in society and organize them. SNCC did it in the 60s.
I will say that what's always so both compelling and great and also frustrating about being out in the real world, which because of COVID, I haven't been recently, but in the campaign or traveling to Cleveland last week and doing door knocking and watching Senator Turner, was this experience of real time talking to people and convincing people. We tell this story on last week's premium episode, which again, I encourage people to listen to. So some of it is online for free. I've noticed this guy who had a Nina Turner yard sign and a Shontel Brown yard sign. And door knocking protocol is not to go up to a door that already has your opponent's yard sign. But I wasn't there as on the behest of the campaign. I was there in a journalistic capacity. So I saw the guy was in his backyard, and I wandered over there by myself and started chatting with him. He was a real character from the Bronx, had 200 pigeons. He was very clear. There's only 200 here. The state only lets me have 200 in his backyard, talking about Mike Tyson and whatnot. His name was Charles. And he explained that he had met Shontel and had never seen Nina Turner, and his wife liked Nina Turner, but he didn't know her. So he was for Shontel. I said, well, fancy that. She's right around the corner. Do you want me to grab her? Senator Turner comes over. They end up having a conversation, which we captured in its entirety on the podcast. And he ends up at the end literally pulling the Shontel Brown yard sign out of the front yard and chucking it in the back. And it's optimistic because on one level, it works. It's overwhelming on another level because it's like, how many of these interactions are you going to have to do? And Nina Turner can't knock on all those doors independently. And are people going to be willing to do that work enough in advance of the real, the next election a year from now? Because there's a special election. It's like less than a year until I think it's 6 months until the next one. Are people going to be willing to do that kind of work that is required to convince people one by one and change their kind of political identity? Because these are hour-long conversations sometimes that have to be had to make people understand what's going on with someone like Joe Biden. At the polling station I was at in Warrensville, a few minutes from my grandmother's house, Shontel Brown's brother was there, passing out flyers and whatnot. And Martise Chisholm, who we also interviewed on the podcast, was able to flip him and basically explain to him why Senator Turner said the half a bowl of shit comment, explain to him all the things that Joe Biden had done. And the guy was like, holy crap, I had no idea. And he obviously couldn't rip his shirt off and vote against his own niece. But that's basically where he was ideologically after Martise Chisholm spent, half an hour, 45 minutes in this parking lot of this high school talking to him about it. And it's like, that really is the project, and celebrities and stuff can speed that up. But it's a lot.
It does. Just hearing that description and what it took to convince, it sounds like it went pretty smoothly, but it does make me think of going off this idea of fraternities and education. It does make you wish for something that could start the process of informing folks of this earlier in these communities, rather than trying to have these talks, which are really more about educating folks and, right next to the election, and having each person have to spend an hour at a time, as opposed to finding some way to get the way, basically the church you visited gets to have its viewpoint spread over a very, very long period of time and consistently in these communities. And there's not a DSA counterpart to that has a similar amount of time to manifest its ideas and make it easier for people to grasp these things very quickly as new candidates come before them.
Well, it used to be unions, right? The person making kind of the working class pitch on some level used to be unions. And that's part of why so many people, in the DSA left say, well, I might agree with you ideologically, but we're just not going to, we have to be talking about a longer time frame because we don't have the union density to be able to push the message fast enough. At the same time, as someone from a community that's particularly squeezed, I always bristle at this idea that even if it's an uphill battle and the likelihood of success is slim, that we shouldn't be trying for a shorter time frame, because I have all of the real-time losses that I know are happening that are inordinately falling on my own community. And there does seem to be a certain amount of privilege to the wait and see aspect or the, oh, Biden's president, so we'll wait until after, or the Our Revolution rebrand to say we're going to do incrementalism now. It's hard to disentangle that from a certain degree of privilege.
I'd also be curious, and probably some people have picked up on this, that like my knowledge of politics is not as broad as my specific knowledge about the things that I wrote about, but I'm curious about, for the people who don't have jobs, how are they educated? People who do not participate in unions, what's the point of entry there? Especially for my, particularly for poor Black people, unions is not a common experience. And maybe, I don't know the history as well as some folks here, and maybe unions had outreach programs on top of what they did educating the specific workers in them. So maybe it's still a good tactic, but yeah, I would love to hear unions plus for people who do not work, or maybe people who are very elderly now and no longer work, either or.
It's a good question. I think that the reality of our community being disproportionately unemployed is an important one. There's a lot of chatter about employment numbers going down,
but also Black people are the most unionized constituency in the country as well. Particularly Black women.
Right. We do disproportionately. I mean, historically, disproportionately have had these government jobs, which have had the benefit of labor protections and unions. So it's a mixed bag. But what I found, even among my family members, my better off family members are people who do have those kind of government jobs, who work for the city water department or the post office or things like that. It doesn't translate into a kind of left politics in the same way it is imagined, I think, on Twitter. I think it opens the door. It's like a point of like understanding where you can start a conversation about, oh, look at all the things that you get because you have this job. Wouldn't it be nice if, et cetera? The same way that like Medicare is a point of like, oh, don't you enjoy this benefit? Imagine if it were broader and you could have gotten it earlier in your life. But it's not like a one for one, like I'm in a union and now I love Bernie Sanders, Yeah,
because the unions have been saturated into the right flank of the Democratic Party over the last 50 years. Particularly the union bureaucracy, the leadership of the union bureaucracy.
Yeah, we talked about that with I'm sorry, no excuses, no shortcuts, whose name I'm blocking because it's late and I've had a tequila soda. But we had her on the podcast.
Jane McAlevey.
Jane McAlevey, thank you. We had her on the podcast, and I really appreciated that she was kind of open about kind of union leadership capture and the gap between rank and file and leadership that often happens, that I think resulted in things like the culinary union leadership not supporting Bernie Sanders, but rank and file in Nevada overwhelmingly supporting Bernie Sanders, and also resulted in potentially realities like NNU leadership and other leadership not being open to even talking about Force the Vote, canceling interviews with Bad Faith Podcast around the time we started saying, oh, in addition to COVID, we wanted to ask you about this, and the going radio silent at the same time that there was some indication that rank and file was much more open to it. And the same with DSA leadership, having a difference of opinion with the small poll that was actually taking of DSA members about their interest in that idea, etc. So, I mean, I appreciate her being open about that, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more broadly more. I skipping that question about sci-fi because we opened with it, but let's ask this one. Can you talk about elections boycott as a strategy within the context of voting rights issues? I heard Matt Taibbi just saying this on his show with Katie Halper most recently. At what point should part of the leverage of whether it's Black people or poor people or whomever, be to say we're actually going to withhold our votes? Is there untapped power in the millions of people who were in the streets last summer saying we're not just marching, or the people who just had the Medicare for All marches to say we're not just marching, but we are a organized group that is willing to withhold our votes as a bloc unless certain concessions are made?
I don't see that as a sound political strategy. As H. Rap Brown said, elections are an organizing mechanism for the left and particularly for revolutionaries. You organize your communities around election time. You give them political education. You register them to vote, not expecting that you're going to get the kind of radical or actual good left politics you'll get from the government, but it's a time for political organization, and you should not give up a right that the ruling class, particularly the right flank of capital being Republicans, are trying to take from you anyway. The key is not to give up your right to vote in a boycott. It is to effectively orchestrate and organize your people so they can pressure the ruling class to protect their right to vote.
What about this idea that there's certain constituency groups, let's say Latino voters, that get more attention politically in part because arguably they aren't such a concretized bloc that reliably votes Democrat? And so you saw this with Joe Biden on that leaked call from last fall saying, you got to work with Latinos, kind of, chastising the Black civil rights leaders that he was on this private call with. You see this in kind of like the prevalence of immigration discourse and the efforts of various people at the debates to speak their pidgin Spanish, as opposed to kind of the willingness to ignore certain really core Black issues and multi-generational poverty, et cetera. Do you not think that the power of that group, the attention, at least, even if it's superficial, that's played to that group, has something to do with the fact that they are not a reliable, dim voting bloc in the way that Black
that doesn't mean it's because they don't vote. It just means that they don't have their political and administrative leadership in the pocket of the Democratic Party, like Black politics is, because of the Black political class. Perfect example. Why did Kamala Harris in the election in 2020 feel that she had to do a Black male appeal at barbershops to reach out to Black men? Because their polling internally demonstrated that Black men had the highest amount of disaffection in the Black community towards the Biden-Kamala Harris ticket. So because those Black men were showing signs that they not only would not vote, they might vote for Trump, that's when they paid attention.
Isn't that proving my point, Pascal? Aren't you making
there's a difference between saying you're going to vote for someone else and saying you're not going to vote.
Right, but I didn't say not vote. I said
election boycott.
The Democratic Party.
I'm talking about the election boycott as a boycott means you don't vote.
Well, let's say, I don't know what JM's talking about, but regardless, let's say you're going to vote for a third party or potentially vote for a Republican.
Okay, that's a different thing. I have no problem with that. The whole don't vote at all. I'm not going to advocate for people to give up a right that the Republicans in the right flank of Capitol are already trying to take from them. But if you say we're going to vote for a third party as a strategy or vote for another party, I don't have a problem with that. No, I don't believe we should be telling people who to vote for. I think we should be telling people asking people what kind of politics they want and need. We shouldn't be telling them anything. We should be asking them how to effectuate the kind of politics that they want, need, and believe they should have.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this one? All right, I have a question here from Stony Blue about Cuomo. I don't know how much you guys have been following the Cuomo news. They want to know.
Oh, my God.
Okay, Andray, I feel like you might be the one. Here we go. Stony Blue asks, let me put it up on the screen. If you agree with those who believe some powerful players want Cuomo out, wonders if we agree with those who believe that some powerful players want Cuomo out. That this is like not really actually about the substance of what he's done or has been accused of doing, but about the fact that the powers that be just actually want him out for other reasons.
He is the powers that be. Like, why are we on a snipe hunt for the one above all? To figure out whether he's being forced out of power because he pissed off some shadowy cabal. I think that trying to figure out whether there's a conspiracy afoot because the politician that you happened to like got fucked up, got hoisted by their own petard. It's a waste of energy, frankly. Like, and it's not even as if Cuomo was somebody to throw voter support behind. This is the same person who could have closed prisons during the outbreak of COVID and refused to, who got on a call with private industry, some friends in the private prison industry, and laughed about using prison labor, or rather laughed about opening an IPO with PPE made by prison labor. This is somebody that knew that COVID was ripping through senior care facilities and didn't do jack shit about it and never held anybody accountable. So my question is, why? I don't know. I don't see politics as a team sport thing. I believe in the power of party politics, but I don't believe in this team sport shit where if a politician who belongs to the team that you happen to support not only fucks up, but gets people killed, that there's there's anything to talk about or defend. Like, you can't just overlook all of that shit just because he's a Democrat. So I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. And I'm going to devote zero mental real estate to that possibility because he's a piece of shit.
All right, Andray. Well, how about this? Here's a pointed Pascal question from Zachary Gonzalez. Please ask Pascal about Henry Wallace and the lessons we can draw from the coup establishment Dems pulled against him and how the modern Dems are acting now to prevent any meaningful progressive challengers from succeeding. What efforts must be utilized to have third party prosper? So we talked about a little bit about that, but this third party question, is it possible and what would it require?
It's a really interesting metaphor. Henry Wallace was vice president during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. Some people believe he was a socialist. I think he was, but he had very left politics. And because of the pressure within the Democratic Party, he was forced out. And then Roosevelt went with Truman, I believe, as the history goes. And it's very, very similar to kind of what happened to Nina Turner in Ohio. And I think it definitely gives an interesting demonstrates to us that the Democratic Party has been the party of coalescing with the right against the left since its early history. And it's always been a party that basically exists, and I say this all the time, the Democratic Party exists to neutralize the politics and policy to its left, to coalesce around with the politics to its right. And I think that what we know is that, I'm not a member of the Democratic Party. I never have been. I don't trust the Democratic Party. I've always been an advocate of third parties. But since we're in a time right now where sadly people believed in Democratic Party electoralism, and we do have a left faction of the Democratic Party, the goal is to radicalize that left, make them more radical, and move them in a more radical agenda and tactics in which they will force the neoliberal corporate sellout center or right of the Democratic Party to address their needs. And they have to become more aggressive in doing that.
I want to open it up to others, but I want to say, again, if you are watching and haven't already subscribed to this channel, please help us out. It helps the algorithm, all the things, and hit the subscribe bell so you don't miss these kinds of impromptu chats, because I'm not good at planning in advance. I live life on the edge. Specialty Archives asks, my naive request, can the left stop referring to centrists as moderates? They know what makes them sound sensible. Why are we doing them this favor?
Exactly.
What do you guys think what are your favorite alternatives to moderates?
Corporate Democrats.
Anyone else?
I can't think of corporate Democrats. Let's just go with that.
All right. Okay. Min Kazmaz asks, U.S. elections equal rigged. Votes counted on computers. Is our current online left dialogue about addressing this enough? How can we demand real reform? I don't know. Are we in a place where we think that we can't even trust election results?
Well, even if we didn't, the only way you address that is by doing what? Organizing working class and poor people around the politics they need and demand to address their problems. We got to go to where the people live and talk to them about what their politics needs to be. Again, we have models in history that did this. Fannie Lou Hamer did not rise like a phoenix out of nowhere. She got the political education of Ella Baker that told her how to operationalize politics.
I mean, the question is, if you think that it's literally rigged, like, in the first season of Scandal, then no matter how many people you talk to and get to vote for you, it doesn't matter.
No, then you find a way to fight the politicians who are allowing the elections to be rigged and reform it and change it.
I mean, I think that what this person is getting at is it going to require something extra electoral and revolutionary? Because
absolutely,
there's absolutely no legitimacy.
Yeah, it could be radical, definitely. General strikes, wildcat strikes, all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, this is what Rentaro Matsukata asks, what's next in terms of electoral politics? What are the battlegrounds of 2022 and who are the candidates of interest?
I think we should not be focusing on electoral politics. We should be focusing on mobilizing and organizing the same constituency we've been talking about for this whole show, which is poor and working class, Black, brown, white, Latino people.
Is there any value in saying, like, even if we don't like the focus on electoralism, that's what can get some kinds of people's attention, and maybe we could get someone who might be able to break through, have some more integrity, do the Cori Bush thing on the steps, get people to rally behind, do the Bernie thing, but not have the identity politics baggage on of being a white man? Like, is there anybody you're excited about coming down the pike?
Individually, there's no one individually that I'm particularly excited about, but we should use election season as an organizing and mobilizing opportunity for the constituencies who we want to get turned on to left politics. Instead of just saying, vote for this person, organize and mobilize.
Andray, Bertrand, Leslie, I don't know if there's anybody that, there are these races going on, and just to some extent, sometimes, it's just the media that decides if there's someone who's going to be an AOC and popular, or they fade into obscurity, kind of like a Shahid Buttar. Like, are there people we should be keeping our eyes on so we don't let these opportunities to, like, for instance, challenge Nancy Pelosi to just pass us by?
I'm just going to bow out of that because I've been in, as everyone will see from the article, just like a hole of data, and the world has kind of passed me by while I was like writing and pitching. So I'm here in part to learn. This is close to a graduate seminar for me, so I appreciate the education.
All right, well, let's go to Tambray Obinson, who asks, who says, re-Hollywood, I think for many, material rewards and access overpower revolutionary impulse, even if present prior to admittance. Bertrand, point of entry for Black poor voices in this environment?
The ideal point of entry for me doesn't exist. I would like a point of entry that's closer to the mainstream. I would like a point of entry that is close to HBO and Netflix and Disney and all these places that have the power to immediately do an initiative and launch people. To get that to be a point of entry, to a large degree, is out of the power of poor Black folks. I'd say the closest that they can do is, I've seen a lot of folks on Twitter responding to the article with their own experiences of poverty and pushing back. Or how do I put it? Supporting what I'm saying about the importance of letting them tell their own stories. And I think to a degree, doing that as often as possible in whatever space you can, making it clear that everyone knows that any Black face doesn't necessarily represent you in that experience. So whether you're just a working class person with a Twitter who has this background, or somebody, I've gotten, DMs from like PhDs and professors and people who had the very same background, speak up, call people out, mention it when you see something being wildly promoted that's supposed to speak to this experience and it doesn't. When I was, I should frame that, supposed to speak to this experience, but the person who's writing it, the person who's being promoted, they're not really connected to it. And as far as you can tell, they are not doing anything to increase, the presence of poor Black people there. I think back to when I first got to graduate school in 2014, and people all around me, it was like they were calling out the lean-in feminists for not really representing the interests of poor women. Not long after that, you get the women's marches where we're noting how, poorer women were not a part of those strategy meetings. They weren't elevated to that. You got to this point where the public is, or at least the public that reads these things and cares about these, they're policing it a little bit. And if it was policed to that degree, if there was that sort of chatter, if there was that desire to not just accept any Black face and maybe, break the unity ranks a little bit, then maybe when, the Academy Awards announces its initiatives and it doesn't even mention class within race, it doesn't get a slap on the back, and it doesn't get this salutary article from Ibram X. Kendi, who, right now is the premier voice, Black voice of, white liberals. That doesn't happen if people push back hard enough, and then maybe we get a point of entry closer to the mainstream. Other than that, it's just guerrilla stuff. I got here through like cold pitch after cold pitch until I found someone kind enough to give me a shot. And it's not the best.
Shout out to Current Affairs, who put both of us on. And if you haven't subscribed, the hard copy is genuinely gorgeous. Mine just arrived for this month probably arrived a long time ago, but I never checked my mail. So I just picked it up a couple of days ago, and it's glorious.
Best.
Current Affairs. If the answer was no, I'll move on to the next question. But any thoughts about the DSA convention that's happening?
We had a show yesterday, and we asked someone who was there. He couldn't give us anything at the time, but I just got someone send me a report for someone who attended the convention at a roundtable. So I haven't read it yet, so I don't know any details at all as of yet.
Okay. Amanda asks, how do you reconcile the response from Dems re Cuomo v. Biden? It feels like peak hypocrisy. Also, Jen Psaki responding to the reporter Francesca Chambers asking why Biden goes home so often by saying, you like to go to home too, don't you? That was so rude and very Trumpy, and yet radio silence from the media. I missed that one. the Cuomo Biden thing, do you think it's going to create any more scrutiny around the allegations against Joe Biden, which at the beginning of the primary race, Kamala Harris said that she believed women?
I mean, the fact that Biden came out and said, Cuomo's got to go is kind of hilarious considering he has his own allegations against him. And it kind of demonstrates, what is this Me Too, quote unquote, movement hashtag really about? Who gets to get Me Too'd and who doesn't? And I mean, obviously Joe Biden is above the fray in that regard. But, Cuomo was, what he did was above the pale, man. It was outside of acceptable behavior.
Yeah. Anyone else on that before I move on to Ginny Howe?
Yeah, I would just say don't hold your breath looking for any sort of consistency on this from anybody.
Yeah, I knew you were going to come with the resident cynic take, which I 100% agree with, Leslie.
The correct take also. The correct take.
The correct take. I'm with you 100%. Ginny asks, what do you take or make of the new extension of student debt payments? Is this an indicator that maybe they'll cancel it all?
No, it's a poison pill. It's a poison pill because basically they realize that COVID is getting worse and people are going to be seriously economically affected by the fact that the Delta variant is affecting folks more adversely. And, I think that they're making concessions instead of just taking the ultimate necessary step, which is to cancel the debt. This whole Biden posture of not. I mean, don't forget, when Biden came into office, there were literally people on the left, and I think some people, like Brianna might be one, who believed that this guy was so horrible that he was going to govern with austerity. Mm. People all of a sudden like, oh, Biden is the new FDR. All these liberals like, Biden's the new FDR. Oh, that's wonderful. What Biden is doing is that, number one, he's responding to a crisis. What Biden is also doing is realizing that the Democratic Party has lost so much absolute legitimacy with the rise of this new left and its ability to be able to deal with the issues of poor and working class people, particularly under 40, that they have to give some concessions and avoid the ability to look like the party of austerity in the face of the looming Trump supporters. Everything they're doing right now is to keep and hold the water as much as they can because the only thing that terrifies them is Trump. That's it.
I think that's right. I mean, we had Astra Taylor on an episode within the last couple of weeks talking about student debt. She is a co-founder of the Debt Collective, this debtors union. And this is before the moratorium was extended. We were having this conversation about whether or not this was a revolutionary potential moment because of so many millions of people who are going to be affected at this policy at the same time. And what she disclosed was that she had heard that the Biden administration's reluctance to extend the moratorium into 2022 was all about them not wanting to push the argument that they had done, COVID was in the back. It was over. They had solved the problem and they wanted to cut off all of these programs before 2022 so that they can make the argument that it was done. And I think your point, Pascal, about all of these interventions, the biggest relief package ever and all of that is not an indicator of Biden's largesse or that the Overton window has moved so that progressivism is on the ballot for the Democratic Party, but an indication of how close we are to things truly and genuinely collapsing. And it's a concession made out of absolute necessity because we are on the brink. And it should be a signal to those on the left who are looking for a more revolutionary outcome to keep pushing around those exact pressure points.
Absolutely. Good point.
Bethany Faith asks, now that it's obvious to everyone that the Dem Party hates leftists, how likely is Nina Turner to run as an independent? I would ask that in a slightly different way. Do you guys think that would be advantageous for her to do so?
In terms of real politics, it would not work in her constituency. It wouldn't work.
I don't think if she ran in the same, well, I guess you don't call it ridings, you guys call them districts, but would it work? I caught myself, but no, I don't think running third party in the district would roll in her favor whatsoever. But I do think that there needs to be a concerted effort to run third party in Democratic races, especially in the close ones. Because what's going to happen is that they'll start howling about spoilers and handing elections to the Republicans and whatever. To which I say, And I'm just
we need third parties. Third parties need to shoot for local. We need more Kasama Shawans and less Howie Hawkins. We need third parties on the local level.
On a local level,
they can start building.
At the municipal and state level. That's where I think third party is going to be the most effective. You have to start building political constituencies at a level that is like responsive to voter demands. Your local alderperson, city councilor, or whatever is going to know a hell of a lot more about what's happening in your neighborhood than your state rep or, God forbid, your federal rep, who doesn't know jack shit aside from how much they're pulling in from corporate donors. That's where it has to start. But I do think it's necessary though to start running third party reps at least the state level. If only because the stalking horse is going to force the party to start pulling left to remove the competition. Same thing happens a lot with Canada, with the Liberal Party and the NDP. The NDP of the back when it was called the CCF, back in the 1960s and 70s, was able to force the Liberal Party to accede to several leftist demands, including nationalizing healthcare. Because they pose such a threat to Liberal Party fortunes. So I know that there's a lot more structural barriers in the United States, legally at the polls, also in people's minds about breaking the duopoly, but you have to start somewhere.
Well, let me ask you this question. Nina Turner got pummeled in these ads about the half a bowl of shit Biden comment. At the same time, I told the anecdote of Chantel Brown's uncle being flipped at the polls in part because of talking about Biden's record. Is there an argument that regardless of whether she runs as a Democrat or independent, that she should lean into her adversarial relationship with the Democratic Party instead of trying to paper it over by having Bakari Sellers come down or what have you? And I'm genuinely asking this question. I know the answer. Is there an argument though that she should lean in and say, yes, I said voting for Biden is like half a bowl of shit because this is what Biden has done to Black folks, and actually exposing that instead of it all being kind of like a subtext conversation?
I think the biggest reason why Nina Turner lost is that she did not maximize Black voter turnout. In some of the poorest districts in Cuyahoga County, there was like a 6% voter turnout. The overall turnout for that whole district was 18%. She had the Black voters in her earshot, and I think that, yes, it was the dirty PAC money that went out to those people who were supportive of Israel that definitely took her out in the white suburbs. But if she had maximized that Black voter turnout, did Nina Turner do a major voter registration drive?
But Pascal, that's the question. The question is, would that have been aided, that effort at turning out more Black voters, been aided by her embracing that adversarial relationship to the Democratic Party,
yes,
and saying in her ads,
in this current moment, yes, I think if she stuck with that politics, went with Jim Crow Joe, mass incarceration Biden in Black communities, she would have been able to get them. And because she's already a member of the Black political class, they couldn't deny her a platform in those Black churches. And she already has connections to those membership organizations that control those ideological infrastructures as well. Another question needs to be asked: were the teachers' unions behind Nina Turner? I heard there's questions about whether or not Nina supports charter schools or not, and that might have been an issue in terms of whether or not she had their support. That is, Black teachers and Black communities are the foot soldiers of electoral politics. If she doesn't have the Black teachers unions behind her, that's a problem.
What do the rest of you think about the idea, the risk benefit of leaning into, yes, voting for Biden is a half a bowl of shit?
I mean, what's the point of, I don't know what's the point of hiding it. Like, they call her everything but the N-word already. Like, I guess I just don't understand. Like, are we supposed to pretend that like the reason they spent all that money against Nina Turner is because she's on the Democratic Party's shit list from on the Clintons shit list? Like, is that not just what happened? Like, am I kooky for thinking that this is just like a personal vendetta from someone very powerful in the party, and if you try to pretend like that doesn't happen, they just can destroy you? Like, is that I haven't heard anybody say that, so every time I think that, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm Looney Tunes, but I didn't really ever think she would have a chance because the richest and most powerful people in the party didn't want her to win and don't want her to have a career in politics at all.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think to Pascal's point, there obviously was this incredible mobilization against her. And I think but for that, she would have won. So you can't ignore that. At the same time, and this is what we talk about with tomorrow's episode, which will actually be free. You should tune in with Bernie 2020 Deputy Campaign Manager, Ari Rabenhoff. You know, we ask him about these kind of questions. Like, okay, yes, Bernie lost because everybody mobilized against him, blah, 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 blah. Obama made the call. At the end of the day, you knew that was going to happen. So what is the plan for the left to be able to get past that? And I think, you know, the question is, if they're going to paint you as inauthentic and not a real Democrat, is the answer that you make sure you don't say things like half a bowl of shit and you make sure you ran your whole life as a Democrat? Like, should Bernie have always just run as a Democrat? Or is the answer instead to say, leaning into that and talk about the Democrats and corruption, the history, the way that he did with Hillary Clinton in 2016 in a way that I found very effective? Bertrand, I want to let you out, and anybody else who has a day job tomorrow and can't go past the 3-hour mark, I don't want you to feel trapped. I really thank you for being here and talking about your piece, which again was excellent and viral, and people should read it at Current Affairs. It's linked in our episode with Bertrand and Damon Cooper from Very Smart Brothers. You should check that out. It's a free episode. I think it was last Thursday at Bad Faith Podcast. Anywhere else where people can find you before you leave, Bertrand? Oh, you're muted.
Just Black Trash on Twitter, and then Current Affairs, and then I don't know, a lot of podcast opportunities. I keep seeming to come back to Bad Faith, so maybe check this out. I might be back.
Follow Bertrand on Twitter so you can see all his appearances on all the other podcasts and all of the things that he does. Say your hand, spell it out because it's got a number in it and stuff.
Yeah. Someone took it, I guess. So it is BL4CK_TR4SH. It's Black Trash with a 4 instead of an A. That should be.
And an underscore in the middle. All right. Thank you for that. And thank you for all your time.
My name, there's not a ton of Bertrand Coopers. So even if you just Google Bertrand Cooper and Black Trash, it's going to come up. You'll find it.
That sounds so Jamaican, by the way. I don't know what your background is, but Bertrand Cooper is a Jamaican-ass sounding name.
I get everyone who's got anywhere around the Caribbean, they ask me about that. Haitian folks. I think it's like a really just popular name there, which is strange because for me, nobody had that name.
Well, what's your Black background? Where's the Bertrand from?
My grandmother saw a pastor that she liked who had that name and gave it to my dad. That's about the extent of the story.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So maybe the pastor was Jamaican.
Yeah. I got it. Yeah. I wish I had a cooler story, but thanks everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Later.
Bye.
All right.
Having the name Bertrand in 2021 is like having the name Cleophas.
and Bree, I actually do have to run too. So
understandable, Leslie. Thank you. You were a real trooper here from the get-go. Want to remind people where they can find you as well?
Yes, you can find me at patreon.com/struggle session or sesh.plus or struggle session.substack.com if you're feeling contrarian. Twitch.tv/struggle session. We have podcasts about politics, movies, pop culture. We have great episodes with 2 of the guests currently on the panel now and 1 more coming soon, hopefully. Also, hey, if you like swag, check us out. strugglesession.shop. Check us out. Thank you so much. I'm just a working podcaster, so please support me. And that's the day job I have to get to. Subscribe, sesh.plus. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Of course. Good night, Leslie. And Leslie's content is genuinely great. I know personally, it's a lot of politics, and I like my politics mixed up with some pop culture, and Leslie really gives me the fix. So
thank you all so much.
Strong
So nice meeting you, Pascal. Good seeing you again. Thank you.
Hey, Leslie.
All right. I'm muscling through these questions because I told the patrons I was going to prioritize them. So I appreciate you guys, but anytime you need to tag out, just let me know. No pressure. Okay. Ray Arsa asks, thoughts on Letitia James? Would her potential run for governor be at all advantageous to the left, given her early wins with WFP against the Dems? Does her initial alliance with Cuomo and eventual takedown of him give any weight to the inside game approach, or is this an exceptional case?
Is there any evidence we have that she has really progressive left politics?
Nope.
I wouldn't support her then.
Yeah. I am forgetting the details of her run, but I remember not feeling like I support. I remember watching the debates and feeling not positive about her. Obviously, she's apparently handled this Cuomo investigation very capably, and it seems like it may, have results. So there's that. But in terms of like her being a scion for the left, no. I'm not paying that much attention to the chat. I just banned the person that I think you're talking about, Sam, but I wouldn't fret too much about it. I have a very good ability to ignore people on Twitter. It's cultivated over many years of practice, and I suggest everybody really lean in to that. There's a question from Mallory Mooney about our recent episode about the Supreme Court. I don't know that this is the best time to address that. As I mentioned, a Supreme Court podcast made by my friends. What podcast was that? I will reply to you in the chat with a link to that. Here's a good question that you guys, I think, would be good to answer. What do you think about the Puerto Rican struggle and the potential status, the status as a political issue on the mainland again? How do you make it an issue? When Trump was in office, obviously there was the whole toilet paper towel fiasco, and it was very front of mind. What about now?
Are we talking about Puerto Rican statehood as an issue, or are we talking about the way that Puerto Rico is treated as a kind of second-class colony with the United States?
Well, there's a relationship between those two things, no?
Absolutely. I think that on the left, we should definitely take it on as an issue. And I think that people in the Puerto Rican community should think about radicalizing their politics and forming a kind of left politics. We have some people who were leftovers from the Young Lords movement who are Puerto Rican, Felipe Luciano, who definitely still have left politics that, we should try to make alliances with and address this issue.
Yeah.
I guess the question is is there a stronger grassroots demand for decolonization or for statehood? Because I hear a lot of people say, just make Puerto Rico a state, but I don't know for certain. Is that what they want?
Yeah, that's a very up in the air question. The political thing to say, the PC thing to say is, statehood if they want it. It's like a very Buttigieg formulation, like statehood for all who want it.
Yeah, no, and I've heard that one before, but what that really says is, like in the minds of the listener, what that's saying is, if they want to be a state, we should grant them statehood. If we don't know, status quo, right? There's never really a conversation. Like they don't say, for example, decolonize if they want it, or just decolonize, period, right? Because that's not the side of the equation that they want you to think about. So I've heard arguments like for both sides. I've heard arguments for statehood, and I've heard arguments for decolonization. I wonder what usefulness the conversation among people who don't live in Puerto Rico has if we can't come to a consensus, like from a left point of view, as to what it is that we should be supporting.
Yeah, well, on our recent episode with Glenn Greenwald, it was about other things, but he raised as an example of kind of liberal, the kind of argument that he will make on Fox News is to agree with Fox about the fact that there's a certain liberal interest in some things like voting rights and Puerto Rican statehood and DC statehood that is in part self-interested from like a political power perspective and really isn't altruistic, even if it also happens to be the right thing to do. And I think this really is, I don't know, I think there's obvious advantages for Democrats as a party to have statehood, both DC and Puerto Rico, and that complicates this conversation. But I will completely confess to not really understanding the contours of why people are pro and con in Puerto Rico. So we're definitely going to have to do an episode and follow up with a guest about that. Brandon F asks, I learned about pro-Black anti-capitalism in high school, but my Christian parents beat it out of me. How do I overcome my fear of writing from a left perspective?
Read Black Agenda Report and read some books by some good political scientists like Cedric Johnson, Preston Smith, Adolph Reed Jr., and get that political education going.
How did you first start writing, Pascal?
I started writing. I had my own blog, Thought Merchant. I still have it, thoughtmerchant.wordpress.com. And sometimes I still write posts there. And
did you have to overcome any fears about like not feeling entitled to or imposter syndrome or who's going to read this anyway?
No, but I didn't. It wasn't clandestine. It was the name of the blog was Thought Merchant. I didn't hide my identity, but I was speaking very sharp. I've always kind of been a contrarian in terms of my politics, But my first published piece was a product of someone from the Black Commentator, which was a very kind of well-respected Black left publication in the early aughts, right before Obama. He saw a piece that I wrote called "The Revenge of the Good Blacks," and he liked it, and they published it in Black Commentator. So that was my first published piece. It was in 2007, as a matter of fact, and it was about class. And people asked, "Was like, what is it? Is this class thing part of your Marxist ideology?" I said, "My fixation about class and Black people has nothing to do with Marxism. It has to do with the fact that I'm Haitian. And being Haitian, I understand how class actually affects Black people and is used as a means to neutralize politics for Black people who are working class and poor. That doesn't mean I'm not inclined to Marxist thought. I'm not an orthodox Marxist. I use Marxism as a tool to challenge capitalism, but I'm not afraid. I have no problem dealing with Marxist people or people who are orthodox Marxists. I think it's a valuable way to critique capitalism. It's one of the most, if not the most valuable way of doing it."
What do you think about this charge? And I've been accused of this. I mean, I'm accused of this every day, but particularly today, of class reductionism. I do think that there are some class reductionists. I don't think that I am one. I'm supportive of, let's say, reparations as a racially specific policy. But my critique has often been that
why are you a class reductionist if you're against reparations? What if you can make an argument to show you that if they give you reparations, all it's going to do is basically make sure middle class Blacks are better off, because these kinds of race first policies end up literally becoming fatback and biscuits for those classes.
Sure,
as history shows.
I'm not arguing that just because you're against reparations.
I'm not against it either. I'm just demonstrating.
Right. But I'm not arguing that just because you're against reparations, you are a class reductionist. But I would say that if you are for reparations, it's difficult to argue that you are a class reductionist because you support an extremely substantial and racially specific, it's even like sub-racial, because it's not even all Black people, depending on your theory of the case of reparations. But my argument is usually that, hey, I might be for other racially specific policies, but most people just talk about it without actually being able to articulate a single one. So when you ask some of these kind of race first folks to say, okay, well, what's the gag? Like, what is the racially specific policy that you think that we all need to get behind first before doing some of these, economic equality, universalist programs? And you won't hear anything. Like, genuinely, I'd love to know.
No, all of those. First of all, the only reason, let's make this abundantly clear. The only reason anyone is talking about reparations right now is because when Ta-Nehisi Coates realized that the Obama presidency was failing, he put up his fist like most Black politicians or writers of Black politics do and said, reparations, my Black political project, is failing. Bruce Dixon, my mentor from Black Agenda Report, said something that I always held. He said, anytime you hear a Black politician say reparations, it's usually because he got into political trouble or his project is failing. That's like the way to definitely get your Black card stamped when things aren't working well. The politician will say, we need reparations. Ta-Nehisi Coates, with the rise of Black Lives Matter and Black folk getting shot in the face by cops, realizing that this Obama thing isn't working out too well, all of a sudden it's the case for reparations. And all these people got turned out about an idea that's existed in Black political thought for 50 years, and they acted like they came in with something new, and the Democrats, being as cunning as they are, pimped them out by saying, yeah, we're going to give you reparations. Sure, no problem, as a means to get them wedded to the Democratic Party and the neoliberal flank. And even if they did get reparations, it's going to be nothing but Black capitalism with some set-aside projects. So yeah, get reparations. You got played by people who were tools of the ruling class. That's the only reason anybody is talking about it. I defy anyone, the founders of ADOS, Foundation of Black Americans, all of them. Were you talking about reparations before Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that piece? Yes or no? No, they were not.
Well, to step away just from reparations a bit, because I'm not really asking this question about reparations. What I'm asking is, how do you prove you aren't a class like, there are people
to prove anything.
Wait a minute, Pascal. There are people, I'm asking for me, myself personally, because I'm interested. There are people who I never want to be dismissive of cohorts of a Black audience that I know see me as someone, I know that I'm in a position of relative privilege and power as a Black leftist who has an audience that's larger than a lot of other people in the Black left, rightly or wrongly. And I never want to feel like I am so tone deaf to what is a genuine thread of thought among the Black. I want to at least give it a moment's due, right? And I want to steel man the argument in all fairness, because I feel like I have a responsibility with this platform as a Black leftist. So the argument being made about me in particular, and others, but about me in particular, is that when I say something about a universalist policy, and I say I personally believe a universalist policy is going to help Black people more than others, part of that is also my belief that I'm not being approached with racially specific policies that people are fighting for outside of reparations. So it's not even so much that I'm dismissing a race first or racially specific policy, is that they don't even exist in any specificity in the public sphere, in the policy sphere, and even the political imagination. And it's a real stalking horse for people just to say that you aren't woke enough or down enough with Black folks. So you say that they exist. What are the policies that you have in mind?
Ice Cube's Black agenda. This one's Black agenda. Everyone's Black agenda.
What's on their Black agenda, Pascal? What is on the Black
capitalism and reparations.
Yeah. So outside of Black capitalism, outside of like giveaways for Black business people and things like that, is there anything else?
No, it's Black capitalism and reparations. That's all it is.
Yeah.
That's all that ever is.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Which literally has been the
action,
affirmative action, that's great. That might work for middle-class Blacks and some union workers.
Yeah, and there's some things around the edges, like, Bernie will say, okay, Medicare for all. Also, we have to make sure that there are culturally competent physicians. How do you do that? I don't know. I mean, by canceling student debt, so more Black people can go back to low-income neighborhoods and practice without having to.
Here's a retort for you. Next time someone tells you that you are a class reductionist because a Black person tells you that you are a class reductionist because you advocate class politics, and they tell you class politics don't work for Black folk, tell your grandmother to give up her Medicaid, her Medicare, and her Social Security. Tell your uncle who was a veteran. Tell your uncle who was a veteran who gets VA benefits to give it up. Tell your people who got small business loans from the SBA administration to give them up. Tell everyone you know who got student loans and went to graduate school to give them up because class politics don't work for Black people.
You don't have to convince me, but the problem is I don't think that argument is very persuasive to folks who will point out that everybody gets those benefits and they don't serve to close the racial wealth gap. And their preoccupation, rightly or wrongly, and I know that, Adolph and Tori Reed have written and spoken a lot about this, about the kind of disparity discourse and what that obscures. But rightly or wrongly, they are not interested in something that doesn't serve to close the racial wealth gap, whether it does it by lifting up Black people or by pulling down white people. They don't care.
I'm so glad. Let's talk about the racial. Next time they ask you, it's not going to cause a racial wealth gap. Ask them one question. Why are we surprised that there's a racial wealth gap when 65% of Black labor were either domestic workers or sharecroppers until 1965? How is that shocking?
Right. Well, then they would say, well, what are you planning to do about it? And will your universal policies actually serve to collapse the gap?
It will for poor and working class Black people. Middle class Black people are just going to have to basically get the same kind of fatback and biscuits they get from Democrats as well all the time, which is going to be Black capitalism and minority set-asides.
Andray, have you ever been kind of pigeonholed like this? Or
I actually love when they call me a class reduction. Sounds like bring the fire. I would love you to come call me a class reduction. Let's have the debate.
Well, Pascal, I will say I don't love it because I don't think that it's true, and also
don't be afraid of the ignorant.
But Pascal, I'm not afraid of the ignorant. I'm trying to just moot this a little bit right now in a safe space, because the point of the matter is, if there are people, my goal is always to meet people where they are and make a biggest coalition as possible. And if I am saying and doing things that make me vulnerable to a critique that I don't think is accurate and also alienates a portion of Black voters, then I want to know what I can do to ward off that critique in a way that doesn't alienate those voters and helps to bring them into the fold. So as frustrated as I am interpersonally about it, I am a big enough person who feels confident enough in her beliefs that I am willing to kind of take on the argument and do so in a way that I would like to think is kind of sympathetic and well positioned to actually change minds.
Here's a response. In the 50-year counter-revolution since the death of Martin Luther King, we know we haven't had class-based politics, right? We haven't, because we haven't had any class-based socialist or left kind of class-based demands by any constituency. The only demands that we've had by Black politicians have been race-based politics and policy, from minority set-asides, affirmative action, enterprise groups, Black capitalism. That's all the demands. If we're worried about the racial wealth gap, And we've never had class-based politics in the 50-year counter-revolution. And all we've had is race-first politics. And guess what? The racial wealth gap has gotten worse. What does that tell you about the value of the race-first politics you've been advocating for in the last 50 years without class-based politics?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a great point. And maybe I'll connect you with some of the people on these podcasts who I know have a certain antagonism for me, which I find to be very interesting. And maybe you can reach them more easily than I can.
Can I say something though? Can I just say one thing?
Sure, Andray.
And that's that. Okay, I want to put this. I think I've talked to you about this. Like, I think there was times before we actually like started talking that I would see you like post something or write something, and I was just like, man, I completely fucking disagree with that. And I did see it as being not class reductionist, but I think like dismissive of like I don't want to say black politics because it's not black politics, but being dismissive, I think, of some very legitimate like policy and like social concerns that some black people who may not have like socialist leanings have. I try to never like dismiss people's legitimately held concerns, and at least try to figure out whether they're coming at it from an honest place or not. So I do think that some of the class reductionist stuff stems from people feeling like they've developed a political conversation within their own milieu around people that are, for the most part, capitalists. And I think some of them have merit. Like, I think the reparations conversation has merit, although, like, as far as the US goes, I don't have a dog in that hunt. If there was going to be any reparations paid out for my ancestors being slaves, it would come from the British government. But
no, some of you guys fled.
What do you mean?
Some of you guys are escapee Americans. American slaves that made it.
That's true. But I'm saying for myself, for me personally, like I don't have a dog in the hunt. Like, I don't have a stake there. Do I believe that the British government owes reparations to people in the Caribbean colonies, Jamaica being one of them? Yeah, absolutely, I do. If you pay the people that enslaved our ancestors, if you paid them like a release, like you indemnified them, and for the purpose of emancipating us, then if you're at least saying that there was some sort of material damage to people through either the institution of slavery or ending the institution of slavery, and if you choose the end of the institution of slavery causes material damage, then after coming to grips with the fact that slavery was wrong, it would then only make sense that there's a material amount paid out for the descendants of people that were enslaved. That all aside, that happens within a conversation, or that conversation happens generally within groups of people that aren't very keen on class-based politics, because they haven't really had those conversations. Those conversations have been more or less stamped out of our communities. Like, the people that won were the assimilationists. The people that were that thought that assimilating into the American or Canadian body politic was going to be the path to liberation, and obviously know that was a well-constructed lie. And the people that were shouting to us that it was a lie have been exiled or murdered or have died out.
So what was good about having 55% of black people living below the poverty line in the 1960s?
Here's what I'm trying to say here. I don't think that it's enough to simply dismiss them and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, because they haven't really been exposed to those kinds of conversations for the most part. I don't think it's a matter of antagonism. I think it's forgetting or just not being exposed to the history of black radical politics. And I think for people that have that knowledge, that information, have done that research, have the text highlighted and so forth, then it's our responsibility to educate people and not to just write them off as race reductionists.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's some people who are, there's always this conversation about like, politicians versus voters, or people who are kind of like the tiny and tastemakers and not no Clay Hannah Joneses and Kendi X's, and the people who follow them, who don't have as much power, control, or knowledge necessarily, And so I think it's important to divide those out. And while I would like to think that I've been very harsh on the people with power who are setting a lot of the discourse. The reason why I'm opening up this conversation is because I feel very differently about the followers, for lack of a better word, the general masses who are being led or misled, as Pascal puts it so well often, by this misleadership class. So
can we be totally blunt and honest? Why
of
this
course,
is happening?
it's 12:24. Go for it.
Right now. The only reason why you get tagged with the class reductionist attack is because they see you in a space talking to and with large numbers of white people. If you wrote everything you wrote and say everything you said on a Black Agenda Report podcast, no one would call you. If you had Daruba bin Wahad on your show every week, talking to him about Black politics, agreeing and disagreeing, no one's going to call you a class reductionist.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And this is what I'm saying right now. And I've said this to people, Black people on the left.
Yeah.
This is me. And I'm not saying that, I know some Black leftists who go on, white podcasts and they make the argument there. This is my opinion. I believe that it is important for Black leftists to make their arguments, as harsh as they may be to race-first politics, in primarily Black spaces and get legitimacy in those Black faces first, and then translate that politics into white spaces. Why? Because I would love people to tell me I'm a sellout for writing at a publication called Black Agenda Report that I know is on an FBI watch list.
Yeah.
I would love people calling me a sellout when I have people who were literally Black political prisoners like Daruba bin Wahad on my show, and my teachers were literally Bruce Dixon, who was in the Chicago Black Panthers with Fred Hampton, and Glenn Ford, who was also a member of the Black Panther Party.
Yeah, I think that's very legitimate. I can't, part of the issue is that, unfortunately, Black left outlets, as it is today in America, don't have the same reach. And also, there's the reality of the Black outlets that do have a larger platform tending to be incredibly neoliberal. So that's very difficult to get. I pitched, especially during the campaign, I understood the value of being in certain spaces, and I would pitch them and get just completely stonewalled, even when I was pitching a Bernie Sanders op-ed or Anita Turner op-ed or something from somebody that wasn't just me, a lowly nobody, And when I was first starting out and pitching, I definitely pitched to all those outlets, but the kind of takes I was writing weren't going to get picked up by the root.
You should have submitted some pieces to Black Agenda Report, man.
The first thing I did publish was in what's her face? I mean, she's blocked me a long time ago. There's an outlet called it was like orange. It had an orange font. I forget. Sorry.
Real Politics?
No. It was a left outlet, and Noah Changa used to write for there. I forget what it was, but the first thing I literally published was in a Black outlet. I published it on Medium, and then the Black outlet picked it up.
Okay.
And then the second thing I ever got published was in Paste, very white musical outlet, actually, with a political thing. And then there was Current Affairs, which I got hooked up through a Black woman that I went to law school with, who I knew had written for the outlet. So that's just how the cookie crumbles. And I think that you're right. And I have made every effort to say yes to every Black podcast that will have me on. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been putting out some pretty Black episodes on Bad Faith podcasts over the course of the last couple of months.
Is that an intention? Are you trying to pivot intentionally?
No, I'm not trying to pivot, but that's where my interests lie. I'm Black. And, I strongly feel like the left, if it's not able to integrate actual Black people, they can say multiracial coalition all day and night. It's not going to work. And I feel like there's more revolutionary potential, to be honest, among Black Americans, for myriad reasons that I've spoken about on the show, than there are among white leftists at this particular political moment. And so I have an interest in fostering that. But to your point, Andray, like I think that you're right, and I understand why people are distrustful, and I don't argue with it, but it is my responsibility to earn that trust, and I hope that conversations like this are a part of that project. There's only 2 more questions from the Patreon, although people have put more in the chat, so I want to run through them. Eric, thoughts on Eric. Thoughts on Black elders, some GOP asking leftists not to protest against racism and white supremacy in the form of a sundown town, Bedford, Pennsylvania, last year, due to the consequences they felt would be felt they would be alone in receiving. As there a parallel to early abolitionism and the Emancipation Proclamation, given that the U.S. Army did not follow through with protection after 1876 and the fall of Reconstruction due to that infamous compromise. If non-whites must listen to all Black communities before taking action against white supremacy because they're justifiably worried about the fallout, then would that, oh shoot, I lost the end. Wait a minute, I'll just read it from here. Then would that have meant not abolishing chattel non-prison slavery at that time? Was John Brown wrong? I don't know if you followed all of that.
It's like a way to.
I don't know. The Sun Downtown. I'm sorry, Eric. We might have to skip that one. That's just like a lot. And then Jonathan Cadman asked, who would you want to have on with this crowd? At least. Oh, he's just asking about other panelists. Okay, we're done with those Patreon questions. Thank goodness, because that's a lot.
Okay, we got more
Evan
questions.
asked, yeah, I see good organizing get trashed because not enough POC in their ranks. Seems impossible to solve / efforts to solve can be called tokenist privileged. Thoughts?
No, just go to the people where they are and try to get them in the organization. Make that a priority.
What does that mean? Because there's also a lot of critique of like, oh, white people, you can't just go knocking on these doors in a Black neighborhood. You need people who are culturally competent to do that work.
Go to a convention, go to meetings, go to where Black people are. Where are the working class unions that Black people are? Get a gym, rent a gym in a Black neighborhood, and send out flyers to Black people in the community and say, we're going to talk about the community and politics.
Yeah, it does seem like there's all this discourse, including around Nina Turner's race about, oh, the super PACs went into nursing homes and got all these older, affluent, whiter people. And I remember thinking to myself, and I always show to my mom about this, we get to Cleveland, and for several years, we would immediately just go from the airport to like the dialysis center because everyone was at the dialysis center. You would go from one to another to visit your relatives. And if the super PAC, if the, Zionist super PAC or whatever it is can access old white people in nursing homes, why aren't Democrats hitting up all of these Black nursing homes? Because nursing homes are very segregated. Why aren't they hitting up these dialysis centers and other places?
Democrats are not interested in Black voter turnout. They're not fighting to protect the Black vote.
But I mean Nina Turner. I mean progressives.
Well, I think Nina Turner really should have worked harder to get the Black votes to come out. And I mean, I think she should even talk to white people in her. I think she should talk to everyone, even the Zionists who have a problem with her politics, and basically try to convince them. But she definitely should have done more of Black voter outreach. Yeah.
I want to say thank you to Fractal. Thank you, Bree, for being self-aware and being humble enough. I can't read compliments about myself, but I get it, and I appreciate you. Thank you. I do. I appreciate you. It's Leo season, but I'm not that kind of Leo.
Oh, you're a Leo too? Jason's a Leo.
I'm sorry?
You're a Leo as well? I
am a Leo.
Jason, my co-host, is a Leo.
Oh, he's got Leo energy. I get it. He's got that like, I'm an entertainer, hosty kind of vibe. The question mark asks, so these sororities really control Black politics?
Did I actually say that? I said they control the ideological superstructure because their membership. Well, who are the Black politicians? Who's the vice president? Is she in a sorority?
Yes, she is.
She's AKA.
She's AKA. Pascal, you're a treasure and an old G. You cool, Andray. Thank you, Fractal. But just for white people who like, or any other racial people who aren't familiar with the Black sorority, fraternity, Greek Divine Nine culture, how would you explain it to the completely uninitiated what it means for us in our specific cultural context?
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that?
How to a completely uninitiated non-Black person who's never heard of Black Greek life, how would you explain it to them? How should they understand it as different from white Greek life and how it is so culturally meaningful and impactful?
These organizations came to be in the early 20th century. The oldest one, which is the one I'm a member of, was founded in 1906. At Cornell University. So they actually started at a predominantly white school, though the precursor to these organizations was a graduate founded organization called Sigma Pi Phi, which was the Boule, which was not for college students. So it was not a college fraternity. It was from men who had particularly graduated from college. So between the period of 1906 up until 1922, you have 8 predominantly black fraternities and sororities, 4 fraternities, 4 sororities. Mine was found, Alpha Phi Alpha was founded at Cornell University. The only other one that was founded at a white university is Kappa Alpha Psi at Indiana University, and Sigma Gamma Rho was founded at Butler University in Indiana. Because there were so few black people at that time who were college educated, and these organizations were generally responding to the work of people like W.E. Du Bois, who had written in 1903, I believe, The Souls of Black Folk, which was basically a clarion call to the black educated middle class to respond to the racial terror that black people were facing with lynchings in the early 20th century, to basically come in under the spirit of racial uplift and challenge some of the more racially conservative politics of the person who was then controlling the ideological superstructure of black politics, who was Booker T. Washington. Because these people were universally trained, whether they be at white or black institutions, and they wanted to be professionals within a system in which they would become basically literally the comprador bourgeoisie. They would be the buffer class of black people who would negotiate ruling class policy for poor and working class blacks on behalf of the black masses, but they would, because they are limited by their university worldview, college, no matter it's a black college or an Ivy League college or a hostel or whatever, you don't go to college to become a revolutionary. You go to college to get a job, to become a middle-class person. Because of that, their worldview was limited to the petit bourgeois aspirational politics that all American university life expects for everyone, except for them, because they believed that they were the talented 10th, as they call themselves, that they were privileged enough to uplift the race and lead them into the future. The problem being that they didn't uplift anything except their own personal career aspirations, because their idea of politics was based on the vile notion of uplift, which is like, if you can be like me, you can be just like me, which is basically being someone who works for white people and doesn't change capitalism. And their worldview in politics were framed in that prism from the beginning, and everything they did, including the fake romanticization we have about the civil rights movement, because Martin Luther King was an alpha, Thurgood Marshall was an alpha, Ralph Abernathy was a Kappa, Jesse Jackson was a Q, because we don't learn about black radical politics like the black communists and the black socialists, who actually were the ones who were kicking forth the doors to get the politics that were affecting black working class people. All of those black civil rights leaders were literally the weakest part of the movement in terms of policy, because they were using this racial democracy politics, because the McCarthy era had kicked out the black radicals from having their real revolutionary policy actually implemented. And because we lived in the era of the 50-year counter-revolution of capitalist realism, we all grew up saying, oh, Martin Luther King and all those people were wonderful, they were so radical. And actually the only reason the United States made those concessions because it was afraid of its Cold War image in the world, with the rise of the Soviet Union and the currently independent global South countries who were considering pivoting to socialism and communism because the Soviet Union was so appealing as an anti-racist force. The United States, because it had to protect its economic interests in the world, realized that they had to end Jim Crow, also because it was less economically feasible because sharecropper labor was not needed with the rise of mechanized farming techniques, that now Jim Crow had to end because it's bad for American business and capitalism. So we've been celebrating basically the weakest part of black movement history, i.e. the civil rights movement, and praising people like Jim Clyburn and John Lewis, when actually there were black people who were challenging this city, this country, and this politics top to bottom. And that's why a lot of black people romanticize these petit bourgeois comprador organizations.
So what you're saying is that the Kappas are the pretty boys and the alphas are kind of more intellectuals and the Qs are the players. That's the kind of outline that I was expecting from you, Pascal.
No, I think I went a little more deeply into that.
I'm just messing. Virtuoso says, R.I.P. Glenn Ford learned about the political effectiveness of the Black misleadership class and its cultural hegemony on bar through his reporting, Black Agenda Report. Mark O'Brien says, Pascal is so based. Love to hear it. Yeah, this was incredibly edifying. I really appreciate both of you spending all of this time with us. We're at 3.5 hours. 900 of you still going with us strong. Much love. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so and hit the bell. You know, I decided to do this impromptu like an hour before we went live. So if you want to watch other live streams like this, I can't promise I'm going to be more organized in the future. My executive functioning is not my strongest attribute. So do subscribe to the channel. Please do follow all of the guests. tomorrow's episode, as a reminder, it's gonna be a good one. It's gonna be big. It's with Bernie Sanders 2020 deputy campaign manager. A few people know the in and outs, like Ari. As soon as I get off of this, I'm gonna write copy for the episode and post it so it will be live.
And Thursday you will be on This Is Revolution podcast.
And Thursday I will be on This Is Revolution podcast. If you are not already following This Is Revolution podcast, I watch on YouTube, and I presume people can also find it in podcast land.
Yes, it's on all relevant podcasts.
It is so good. Like, seriously, I watched, like, it came across my radar, and I watched a couple of episodes, and I immediately reached out to everyone involved, to Pascal and Dr. Makombe, to come on the show. We had this great episode with Andray as well, talking about Haiti and Black politics, and it's so compelling. It's a richness and depth of conversation that I don't hear a lot of places, and it's really unfortunate that these big left outlets don't do more, frankly, to put on a lot of these Black intellectuals, to be honest, that could really do a lot to enrich the conversation that's happening on the left. I'm just going to say it bluntly.
By the way, go
ahead. Mm-hmm.
You can live stream your episode with us on your Bad Faith YouTube page. You know that.
Let's do it. Done. Easy.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the restream link, and you'll be able to, on your Facebook, on your Twitter, and everything. When you're on Thursday, we'll be able to live stream on all our relevant social media and yours as well.
Perfect. Love it. Let's do that. I was put on by the late great Michael Brooks. Like, he was one of those people who I think gave more respect to Black voices than a lot of other folks on the left. And I know that he put on a lot of other people and like introduced them and hit them into the left media sphere. The left media sphere has a bad habit of kind of like finding its people and like recirculating over and over again. So if we're going to talk about a Black thing, we get Adolph Reed, and that's great. I also love to talk to Adolph Reed and Cornel West, but there's a lot of other diversity of opinion and voices out there. And I'm so glad that you both were able to join me tonight. And previously, Andray, can you tell people where to find you as we wrap up?
Yep, my articles are in Maclean's magazine, and I've actually got a piece coming out in the Globe and Mail this week about vaccine passports. And I haven't done a heck of a lot of writing this year. I've really been focused heavily on family and professional development, but I am going to be ramping up towards the fall and winter. So yeah, if you want to find my stuff, you can check me out in Maclean's magazine. I likely find my stuff in the Globe and Mail. And if I post about it, I mean, just go on and read it.
Awesome. And Pascal, you said Black Agenda Report. Do you have a handle or something that people should also be following?
Robert06 on Twitter. You can Google me, Pascal Robert. Black Agenda Report. Just search my name, Pascal Robert. You see my articles. I have articles in the Huffington Post. My Huffington Post blog is on my Twitter. I've been out there for a while. I think people kind of have an idea of who I am. And I've been very well received on the left bread tube. I was on Sam Cedar's show. I was on Naomi Counts. I've been on a couple of people. Hey, Kate, your friend Katie Halper's following me on Twitter, as a matter of fact. Now,
Katie's great. She is. Her and Leslie, I think, are the co-hosts of the left. They're everybody's co-hosts in our hearts and minds. And I love always podcasting with both of them. And I think they're two of the most entertaining people on the left. If you don't follow them already, you absolutely should.
Well, hopefully we can develop a relationship between This Is Revolution and Bad Faith that we can mutualize on our various guests and do joint collaboration efforts, because I think we bring a certain kind of energy here. I think you have a more mellow vibe. Some people say I'm kind of radical. I don't know if it's the hate. I don't know where they get that from. But overall, I really enjoyed all the interactions we've had. We've been trying to get you on our show for a while. I'm glad you decided to come on.
I'm there. Look, the only thing that ever keeps me from going on anybody's show is my flagrant disorganization. If you could see what my apartment looks like behind the computer, you would understand.
So cool, nice, clean, neat feng shui. It's hard for me to believe that you guys.
It's a ruse. My entire life is a facade. Believe me. But I appreciate it. Literally, we filmed our episode with Ari in my apartment, and we cleared out this area, and we both sat here in chairs. And I've curated. This is like half of my bookshelf. I haven't curated past this halfway point. And because Ari was here, I was like, Ben, our producer, promise me that you can't see that half. And Ari shot, and he did, but it's there. And you can see my broom and dustpan, all of these wires and cords and disorganized, like literally 1 inch beyond this is a disaster zone. So that's who I am as a person. I'm working on it. Every day is a journey. But I appreciate both of you being here on this journey with me. It's been 3 hours and 42 minutes. 900 of you guys are still here. God bless you, but go to sleep and get rested up for your day jobs that I know you have. If you haven't already subscribed and hit the bell, subscribe and hit the bell. We were long overdue for getting to 50,000, and really I want to be at 100,000. If you aren't already a patron, we appreciate your support at Bad Faith, patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. All the back episodes, including this really good Nina Turner episode that I really think, despite her losing, helps elucidate what was going on the ground. And I think that's all for this evening.
This is Revolution Podcast. Subscribe, like, hit the bell. Check out This is Revolution on Patreon. Become a patron. Promote the work.
Absolutely. Please do subscribe to both of these gentlemen's channels. And as always, keep the faith. Good night, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Night.